Chapter 432. Faced with the raging shepherd's staff, Mathers finally took a step back. However, his shadow strangely remained where it was. Viscous blood continuously gushed out from the shadow. Following that, strips of bright red flesh and tendons rapidly grew out and intertwined with each other on the pure, white skeleton. In an instant, a human silhouette was formed. The 4 bony wings on the back spread out, and pure, white feathers rapidly grew out of it. A holy halo rose from its head, sprinkling pure, white light. Then it illuminated a hideous mess of flesh and blood. On the perfect body, all the organs were intact, the muscles were well proportioned, and the origin substance was burning vigorously. However, from the beginning to the end, not a single inch of skin was covered. All the muscles and tendons were exposed under the light of the halo, as if the skin had been fiercely peeled off by something, leaving behind such a hideous appearance. As the grayish-white eyeballs moved quickly, 2 golden eyes lit up, looking at Osiris, who was close at hand. The muscular palm raised, 5 fingers spread out. Boom! An invisible barrier appeared in front of the fingers, blocking the impact of the shepherd's staff. Then, the skinning angel took a step forward, extracting the blood from the double helix secret instrument, and grew rapidly. After 3 steps, it had turned into a giant that was not inferior to Osiris. It raised its arms covered in viscous blood and suddenly grabbed the steel wrists. It wrestled with steel. "I'm sorry, Lord of the Flies. I don't have time to play games with children." Mathers took off his hat indifferently and said coldly, "Let this artificial angel, Casimir, play with you. I still have things to do." At that moment, the elegant middle-aged gentleman suddenly disintegrated, turning into endless black blood that swept towards the inverted tree, instantly engulfing it in an all-pervasive manner. In an instant, the fragments of the double helix crystal fell from the sky like a rainstorm. They were growing rapidly and multiplying crazily, forming crisscrossing spears. Wrapped in the terrifying blessing from the land of dreams, they had deeply wedged the laws and framework that Mathers had created in his life into the body of the surviving evil. The crystal cage instantly sealed the remaining evil within. In the distance, the vice principal raised his wrist again and cut the scissors. Everyone's eyes were dazzled for a moment, but then they were dazzled again. With a loud bang, the scissors in the vice principal's hand cracked open. Cold laughter came from the land of dreams far away in the abyss. After all, there was a limit to the time sequence. Sometimes it didn't even matter what the sequence was. As long as they could ensure that a few key stages weren't interfered with, the result would always be on their side. Within the pool of blood in the crystal cage, Masser's face appeared, and he glanced indifferently at Osiris. Then, countless twin spiral crystals pierced out of the angel's back. Strands of light surged within it. It was as if a long time had passed in an instant. The skinning angel's flesh and blood rotted rapidly, emitting a foul stench. However, the beast's face gradually revealed itself from the flesh and blood, becoming more and more ferocious. It raised its head high and smashed down on Osiris's head. Huaishir's vision suddenly went dark. He could feel the terrifying tremors spreading from Osiris's transmission, causing a stream of black blood to flow out of his mouth and nose. It was just the feedback of origin form. Huaishir couldn't withstand such a large body. In the end, it was because his position as the pilot was not compatible with Osiris's original body, so he couldn't fully unleash his abilities. The rotting angel raised its head, as if nothing had happened. It let go of its hand and pulled out a slender bone knife from between its rotting wings. Moving forward, it suddenly stabbed into Osiris's abdomen. Huaishir's vision blurred again. He felt dizzy, and his ears were ringing. "Huaishir, can you take it?" Beelzebub's anxious voice sounded. "Shut up. You're so annoying." Huaisher yelled angrily. It's just a bump, and you have to shout twice. Am I a kindergarten kid? Ha! There won't be a good ending if you still try to be brave, Beelzebub said. Why do you care so much? Huaisher swallowed a mouthful of rusty blood. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to wake up. Be good and watch my performance. It wasn't like he was going to die. Plus, he was already used to dying. It was just dizziness. It was nothing. In the intense pain, Osiris roared. Ignoring the wound on his abdomen, he actually forced the rotting angel to run forward. You like to stab people? Huaisher studied the rotting face. He reached out and pressed the bone knife in his abdomen, grabbing it along with the rotting angel's hand. He suddenly tightened his grip. With a shattering sound, the hand and the handle of the bone knife were crushed into pieces. Casually pulling out the broken blade from his abdomen and throwing it aside, Huaisher raised his hand and aimed it at the rotting angel's head. Left hook. Amidst the roaring thunder, the rotting angel shook violently. Countless pieces of rotten flesh flew up, revealing the ferocious beast face underneath. It stumbled back. Come on, brother. Huaisher clenched his fists and pressed forward. Let's spar. Right hook. Boom. Amidst the loud noise, the rotting angel's two eyeballs flew out of their sockets. It raised its hand and blocked in front of it. The invisible wall reappeared. Osiris's shepherd's staff was raised again, aimed at the wall in front of him, and swept. There was a loud roar, the void shook, and the invisible wall collapsed. Then, without waiting for it to begin to repair, the shepherd's staff smashed down again at the same spot. Like swinging a bat, Huaisher violently swung Osiris's excessive power, not minding the feedback and impact it brought. The third time, it swept. The invisible wall fell apart, and a terrifying wave of air spread. The shepherd's staff smashed into the rotting angel's head, smashing a crack in its skull. The giant of the underworld roared, stepped forward, and stomped its foot down. One of its legs was completely crushed, and the other foot was firmly on its chest. The shepherd's staff fell, aiming at the frantically struggling beast face. Don't move. Huaisher said coldly, the trial has begun, monster. In Osiris's hand, the shepherd's staff was raised, and after making a few gestures, he raised it behind his head and aimed at the head of the rotting angel. Thunder roared, and the staff was swung out. A loud sound burst out. A broken head had already flown into the endless abyss, and it fell without a trace. Good shot. On the spot, the headless corpse quickly collapsed, turning into countless drops of blood. The scarlet Osiris looked back at the inverted giant tree in the crystal cage and grinned. You want this? The giant of the underworld stepped forward step by step, trampling on the Stellaris. The two staffs in his hands slowly unfolded. Why didn't you say so earlier? I'll help you. In the shadows, the spider-like behemoth suddenly shot out and entangled Osiris's body. But then it was torn to pieces. Only a few broken limbs fell to the ground and were trampled into mud. Osiris approached step by step. Don't get in the way, Lord of the Flies. An indifferent giant, I emerged from the blood, coldly looking at the figure that was gradually approaching. It's just an afterimage of Osiris. What can it do? No matter how unappreciative it is, it should be enough. Accompanied by Marth's cold words, an uproar broke out in the chaos again. In the darkness of the abyss above their heads, a terrifying flame bombarded them like a meteor. A dazzling thunderstorm burst out from it. A skinny old man descended from the sky. His upper body was naked, and the muscles all over his body were entangled on his skeleton like iron wires. He was stooped and ferocious. 36 ferocious dark backs of light hung high behind him. As he waved his fingers casually, the heavenly drum vibrated. and a terrifying power that was dozens of times more powerful than heaven's bane poured out together with the lightning from this skinny body. The one who was once crowned, Indra, once again appeared in the world. But this time, he was no longer the important leader of the Indian lineage, but the king of the outer Tao who had been tainted and solidified by the abyss under the layers of support from the Golden Dawn. This person alone suppressed the 4 level 5 ascendants of the Astronomical Association. Chapter 433. Between the turbulent sea and the sky, the white dove looked around blankly and flapped its wings. Then it flew around the huge beam of light, as if it finally remembered where its home was, and flapped its wings and flew away. It was so fast and so sudden. There was no telling where it came from and where it disappeared to. It was as fast as lightning. What was even faster than lightning was a line of iron light that came roaring from behind. The divine mark that was condensed to the limit circled around the gravitational rope of the land of dreams and disappeared. Then the beam of light was cut in half, like a glass column that was cut by a high-pressure water knife. It was as smooth as a mirror. Light in the physical sense was easily cut, and whether it was a wave or a particle, it was unquestionably divided into 2. Even the gravitational force and restraint imposed on it collapsed along with it. The rainbow light descended from the sky again. An old man in a robe walked out from it, opened the sealed box in his hand, and held it high. The world tilted. Everything began to tilt towards a subtle angle, spinning violently. Up, down, front, back, left, and right were quickly reversed and reorganized, forming an invisible maze. The ladder to heaven fell again, but it could not crack the random password, and returned without success. Now, the endless sea was shrouded in the framework of the triple law. The double helix secret instrument gave all abyssal creatures a 25% boost, and all non-hell creatures a 25% suppression. After the primordial soup forcibly smoothed everything out, it gave all non-single-celled and non-mechanical creatures that entered the field a 30% weakening, and a field of continuous decomposition that targeted cells. All creatures that entered the field had to endure the destruction of their own cells like radiation. And the framework on top of that, the box court therapy, instantly turned the entire sea into a sandbox, breaking it down into hundreds of modules, each of which could be flipped at will, forming an ever-changing spatial maze. Following that, a sharp ray of light shot out from the land of dreams and descended from the sky. King Selection Sword. The spatial seal of the box court was completely penetrated by the sword. The moment the ancient longsword was nailed into the Stellaris, all creatures that did not possess the status of swarm leader, crowned, or ruler were forcibly repelled. The deeper they went, the more they would feel the terrifying gravitational force. They would be quickly consumed in the dilemma and die from exhaustion. Then, the special envoy from the Directorate of Defense opened the door of the storage room and poured a spoonful of boiling oil on the globe, using 3 times the amount he had just used. Tribulation fire descended from the sky. Another ray of light was cast from the land of dreams. The reversal framework that operated against entropy and the paradox theory revealed itself once more, subverting the heat, turning it into frost, and then casually turning the frost back into flames. Under the interference of temporal tailoring, the complex and exquisite transformations were completed. In the end, the 2 sides canceled each other out in balance, turning into a meaningless storm that blew in all directions. The theorem framework, eternal world, descended here, turning it into a kingdom of the undead. Then a Tier 5 ascendant from the Russian Federation raised the Holy Grail and set off on a warhorse, galloping through the waves. Holy radiance fell, purifying all the hidden death poison. Bright light appeared out of thin air, illuminating the sea once more. When the area was no longer limited to a single area, A total of 11 creators from both sides superimposed various messy frameworks on the sea, causing the style and laws of the area to change wildly. Countless physical collision effects that only existed in trashy game engines kept appearing here. The scene was completely chaotic. It was as if 3 liters of water were boiled in a pot for 5 minutes, then star anise, fennel, rice, red dates, military models, soldiers, blood clots, pig intestines, seasoned wine, squid, stinky dog excrement, rainbow candy, and a bunch of other things were added to the pot and simmered for 10 minutes. Amidst the violent tremors, Osiris was affected by the aftermath and flew like a rag doll, falling into the endless sea and gradually sinking into the depths. Ear-piercing alarms continued to ring. Huaishur could only see darkness. He panted violently, but he could not support his body. He opened his mouth, but could not make a sound, as if he had become mentally retarded. Instincts, muscle memory, self-awareness, and even consciousness were all messed up by the eye of lightning. Just a little bit more, and he would become a vegetable. Detected pilot's abnormal condition. Switching driving mode. Retreat route planned. Self-disciplined artificial intelligence. Lord of the Flies online. In the cockpit, the Book of Steel slowly rose and locked onto it. Beelzebub's projection appeared, reaching out to take over Huaishur's control rights. However, a raised hand held it tightly. Nobody can stop me from driving the robot. In his dizziness, Hilghost raised his head, green flames shooting out of his eyes. Nobody. In his other hand, the Book of Destiny appeared, instantly reorganizing all his consciousness. It was neat and tidy, as if everything just now except for the blood in his mouth and nose was an illusion. No, Huaishur. Beelzebub was silent for a long time. Whether it's you or this armor, we can't continue like this. Let's go. We're already here. It's the new year. You're still a kid. What nonsense are you talking about? Huaishur glared at him. You're only a little bit away from that bastard Mathers. Meanwhile, he raised his other hand unhurriedly and aimed it at Osiris, who had returned to seek his own death, and indifferently chanted a few syllables. Endless darkness appeared out of nowhere. Like a huge mouth, it swallowed Osiris. Subconsciously, Huaishur took a step back without hesitation. He actually retreated 16 kilometers in the air without any warning, leaving only a straight trail of light. Even Beelzebub was stunned. "What's this?" he asked in shock. "What's this thing?" Boo. Huaishur was dumbfounded. Only now did he realize that after getting rid of all the armor, Osiris's alloy muscles actually perfectly simulated his movements and reactions. He was pleasantly surprised. Mechas know ancient martial arts. Even gods can't stop them. You know that, he shouted excitedly. We're in the bag now. The shepherd's staff unfolded again. It rose hundreds of meters in the air again. The giant of the underworld swooped down, with blazing flames. In the battle, the heretic king looked back indifferently. He did not look at Osiris. Instead, he stared at the trail of light that was quickly disappearing in the air. A hint of shock flashed through his turbid black eyes. Then, undisguised disgust and murderous intent appeared. Such a stance is truly unpleasant. As if recalling something annoying, the heretic king bent his finger and flicked it. A streak of lightning exploded and turned into a thunderstorm, whizzing toward him. Huaishur roared angrily. He swept the shepherd's staff and shattered the sweeping lightning. The giant of the underworld fell from the sky like an ominous star. The golden star fell toward the sea, carrying with it a violent and heavy pressure. The shepherd's staff slashed. The heretic king raised his fist and punched upward without even looking back. An earth-shaking boom burst forth. Cracks appeared on the shepherd's staff, and in an instant it fell apart. Huaishur widened his eyes in shock. Then, He saw the old man raise his gloomy eyes and glance at him from among the countless flying fragments. He clenched his fist and punched again, with endless lightning wrapped around it. This time it was a straight punch. Chapter 434. It was a merciless, full-powered attack. A hurricane erupted, and thousands of lightning bolts shot out from his black fist. They instantly extended thousands of miles, cutting the eternal darkness in the abyss apart. Osiris was sent flying backward. He was pushed from one end of the astral to the other, after leaving behind two deep and tragic ravines. The crocodile shield in front of him was burned red and quickly cracked. Two red-hot arms were exposed. They were trembling slightly. How could this old man be so strong? Weisher's hair stood on end. What made him even more incredulous was that this guy's move seemed to be a drummer. Even though it was completely different from what Elder Luo had taught him, it was the same thing in his bones. The only difference was that one used the origin substance of the ascended realm, while the other used the origin substance of the ascended realm to replace the origin substance with the more destructive lightning. Careful! It's coming again. Under the siege of Surtur, the Holy Grail Knight, and several other sublimators, the heretic king, who was fighting 1-against-4, found some time to punch at Weisher from afar. 6 kilometers away, Weisher already felt the pain of his skull being crushed and his body being run over by a truck. But this time, his dodging movement suddenly slowed down. The sharp sound of the power alarm came from the cabin. There was no power. What the hell? Weisher couldn't believe it. You can't be so weak, right? No, even Ultraman can last 3 minutes. How come you can't even last 3 minutes? You didn't even give Osiris a full charge. Beelzebub was in despair. Brother, you're already thanking the heavens for taking so long with only 10% of power. Lightning and a hurricane rushed toward them like a flood. Weisher sucked in a cold breath. This time, I'm really King dead. At that moment, the rainbow light fell from the sky again. It wrapped around the huge object and smashed into the astral, blocking the lightning like a fortress. The outermost ivory tower emblem was instantly burned to ashes. Then, the terrifying sharp blade hidden inside was revealed. He didn't know whether it should be called a giant cannon or a heavy sword, but the moment the sharp edge of the rainbow gold blade was revealed, it emitted a cold light. He allowed the lightning storm to engulf him, but he was not damaged in the slightest. In addition to the sharp edges on both sides of the blade, countless solemn cuneiform characters were shining on the huge and heavy blade, praising the coming destruction and judgment. Eternal darkness brewed in the pitch-black barrel of the cannon, bringing about an incomparable sense of existence. Supreme Adjudicator armaments. Blades of Osiris in position. A low voice sounded in Osiris's cockpit, causing Weisher to fall into a state of shock. He subconsciously reached out his hand. The spouts on the 16 blades released sparks like rocket propellers, propelling the huge sword cannon forward. It landed in Weisher's hands, fitting seamlessly. Immediately after, in the distance, the Rainbow Bridge's rainbow light flashed once again. A torrent of dazzling silver light descended from the sky. The origin substance interface from the Astronomy Association was fully open to this unknown armor. The energy supply began. In the blink of an eye, the portion of energy that had been depleted began to rapidly increase, 20%, 60%, 80%. In the blink of an eye, 100%. Finally, a message appeared on the screen in the cockpit. Greetings to you, the unknown pilot of Osiris. I sincerely offer you this insignificant help. I hope that Lord Orton's brilliant dream has not been wiped out. The ivory tower. When Weisher turned around, he saw that in the distant sky, the vice principal from the ivory tower was holding his chest and nodding. His originally gloomy face was filled with solemnity as he paid his respects to the predecessors of the previous generation. "Did you see that, Beelzebub?" Weisher could not help but chuckle softly. "Orton has not been forgotten. His sacrifice and death were not in vain. Apart from you, he still left his mark in this world, a legend that cannot be forgotten." Orton, separated by the cage of the double helix secret instrument. Mather's expression gradually darkened the moment he saw the sword cannon descending from the sky. Why is it still so upsetting even after he has been dead for so many years? "Heretic King," he raised his voice. "This is no longer within the scope of a child's prank. Kill him." The skinny old man was speechless. Blazing lightning shot out from his eyes. The 16 layers of pitch-black light on his back suddenly activated. If the previous Osiris, who was regarded as the Lord of the Flies, was still within the tolerance limit of their past relationship, then the giant of the underworld, who was now equipped with the supreme judgment, was definitely a hidden danger. It must be eradicated. Faster than him, the sword cannon burst forth with a roar. At the end of the greatsword, a huge spout shot out a blazing light. After locking onto the armor, a terrifying force was shot out, pushing the giant of the underworld forward. In an instant, the long distance of 6 kilometers was covered in a flash. The rainbow gold sword had already slashed down. It was facing the iron fist that was overflowing with lightning. Amidst the roar, the sword roared, and a huge wave spread out in all directions. This time, the huge armor stood firm and did not move or retreat. The weapon in its hand, which could be called a sword, an axe, or a cannon, suddenly swept out. Bang! The heretic king raised his arm, and his iron-green skin blocked the front of the sword cannon. The high-frequency vibration of the sword blade cut through his skin, leaving a wound. That was because the thousands of torrents of light quickly extended and wrapped around Osiris's body. Layer after layer of light enveloped him in an instant. Overlimit mode activated. Osiris expanded again and roared. Through the binding of light, he roared furiously at hell. When the countless rays of light dissipated, the giant of the dead that was shrouded in them had transformed into a completely different appearance. He wore a sacred white crown on his head and a solemn long robe on his body. An awe-inspiring aura radiated in all directions, forming a huge light well behind him. It was as if a real god had descended into this world. After being reborn from death, the master of the underworld returned to this world. He raised his eyes that were filled with hatred and stared at Golden Dawn, who was fighting with the powerful enemy of the Astronomy Society in the abyss. Then, miracle engraving Arrestau open. Behind Osiris, the light will spun wildly. From the center, a crack opened and slowly expanded, turning into a crack that led to somewhere. In the legends, it was the passage that all dead souls used to enter the underworld. But at this moment, this path of nothingness did not lead to the underworld. Instead, it led to a place that was even more deathly silent than the underworld and closer to the deepest part of hell than hell, an invisible, boundless, and deep crevice that was eternally dark. It was like the primordial moment between the creation of the world, where all things were chaotic in the void. Then in Weisher's hands, the huge sword cannon began to vibrate violently. The blade of the sword quickly moved to both sides, and the cannon began to extend wildly. In an instant, it reached a height of 1,000 meters. In Osiris's hands, it was aimed diagonally at the huge upside-down tree that was entangled in the abyss and unable to escape. Target aiming complete. Warm-up preparation. Cause and effect locking complete. Eliminate original sin, create paradise, and forever separate hell. The ideal country will be created from this. Osiris chanted solemnly, and his solemn voice announced to all existences between heaven and earth, "With this attack, I will establish the foundation of forever without home." In an instant, Marth's expression suddenly changed. He showed a trace of rage. "Lord of the Flies, please call me Beelzebub, thank you." Osiris responded indifferently. Behind him, the darkness in the crevice suddenly boiled, and endless darkness surged rapidly. It was the primordial matter that had existed long before the creation of heaven and earth. It was also a terrifying power that could only be created and preserved at the bottom of the underworld and the source of the Styx River. It was the opposite of everything that was. It was pure nothing. The primordial matter that had created everything turned into a torrent and continuously poured into the sword cannon. Chapter 435. The world fell into a dead silence in an instant. Only the tragic cries of the giant upside-down tree could be heard, and huge scars could be seen. He was burning. Being locked onto by Osiris and receiving the first judgment was like receiving the tyrannical power of the rebooting of the universe. It was the primordial chaos, the essence of the primordial. Even if it was only a wisp, it was enough to cause a terrifying chain reaction, reproducing the terrifying light of the creation and destruction of the world. Because of this, it was called the Supreme Judgment. Before this judgment, all things were equal. Even if it was a surviving evil, it was still broken and completely torn in two. It was unknown how many lords of the abyss were annihilated in the aftermath of his attack. Even if it passed through many obstacles, it still left deep wounds and destruction on the land of dreams. Immediately afterward, the light of the Rainbow Bridge whizzed over and collided with the power of the land of dreams. Seizing this short gap, it mercilessly attacked with all its strength. The two sides collided with each other, setting off a mighty tide in the abyss. For a time, countless figures appeared, wanting to fish in troubled waters. Amidst the continuous roars and explosions, countless figures crossed each other before dispersing in an uproar. The Rainbow Bridge surged and rolled up most of the surviving evil's body, along with the remains of the Queen of Rotten Dreams. It was forcefully pulled out of the stairway to heaven, violently pulled down, sealed, and quickly disappeared. Immediately afterward, it returned, pulled out the ruling authority of the mirror realm from the body of the surviving evil, and left. During this process, the shadow of a white dove flashed by, knocking away a golden figure with a pair of wings on its back. It rolled up the head of the Queen of Rotten Dreams and also disappeared into the void. At the same time, a strange mouse drilled out of a big hole in the sky, pulled out a root of the surviving evil, turned around, and ran away. It was as if 100,000 people had suddenly jumped out to loot a burning house. More than half of the fruits of the Golden Dawn's labor that had been planned for a long time were taken away in an instant. Only a small part of the stairway to heaven's body was left behind, preserving Mather's last breath. The flames spread and quickly extinguished. Soon, the land of dreams got rid of the entanglement of the deep sky fleet and quietly disappeared into the abyss. The harvesting plan that had been planned for a long time was destroyed by a report letter from a newbie astronomy club. How pitiful! In the cockpit, Huaisher could not help but shake his head and sigh. Beelzebub did not say anything. He just chuckled softly. In the silence, Huaisher heard the sound of Osiris cracking, and his expression stiffened. The last bit of hope in his heart gradually dissipated. Do you know why? Such a familiar question. He seemed to have heard it somewhere before, but Mirando could not remember where. However, with the gun aimed at him, he could not remain silent. Feeling uneasy, he answered tentatively, "Because those who eat will have original sin?" Wrong. Huaisher shook his head regretfully and pulled the trigger. "Of course, it's because there's no good fruit for you to eat here." Amidst the smoke, The messenger from Lighthouse delivered the latest analysis results. The ivory tower has proven that the unknown armor is Osiris, who was once built by celestial genealogy. The ascendant of Utopia. No, our commissioner has confirmed the engravings on the boundary stone. The former inquisitor of the underworld, Orton, did indeed pass away when the heaven fell 70 years ago. However, the ivory tower said that the recorded body he contracted did not return. If a new ascendant inherits Orton's will, there's a high possibility that he will become Osiris Pilot. It's not easy to accomplish such a feat with a broken armor. It's a pity that Osiris has been destroyed. Someone sighed. Do you have any idea about the pilot's identity? According to the comparison of intelligence from the Directorate, Lighthouse provided a preliminary analysis. The messenger was silent for a moment and placed a photo on the table. We have reason to believe that Osiris Pilot is this inspector who was left behind on the Stellaris due to an accident. In the photo, the young man stared blankly in the direction of the camera. Sheriff of Shinhai, Huaishur, male, a long row of exaggerated resumes instantly filled the projection screen. Second-order ascendant of celestial genealogy, mountain ghost, nemesis of the green sun, calamity musician, abyss cooking demon, legendary investigator, prince of paradise, third place of Asian rising talent competition, anointed of the witch's night, registered military officer with an internal evaluation of Class S before he could even react. A bunch of titles and merits were piled up on the table, making a loud and clear sound. Just by looking at the dazzling achievements, their minds could outline a perfect template of a person who abhorred evil, was smart and capable, had a noble character, and had a strong personality. Most importantly, only 17 years old. The silence was sudden. The old people who were used to seeing storms and waves were drinking tea, but the commissioners from all over could not help but look at each other. They felt that something was not right. Are you sure? Someone began to doubt. He's still too young. Do we need to observe him for a while? After a moment of silence, the messenger from the lighthouse picked up the remote control. He should still be at the scene. We have just connected to the surveillance on the Stellaris. We can take a look at the specific situation first. The various reports on the big screen quickly moved away, and the images from the remaining surveillance on the Stellaris kept appearing. In less than a second, the terminal had already detected Huaishur's location. The irrelevant images quickly shrank, and only a few shots of the scene were zoomed in. The first thing they heard was the sound of a gunshot, followed by a scream. Then they saw the broken figure rolling on the ground, and the cold figure standing beside it, holding a gun and looking down. This atmosphere, no matter how they looked at it, did not feel right. It was as if they were witnessing the scene of a murder. They watched as the murderer carried a hammer and coldly broke the victim's limbs, leaving him to wail tragically. Finally, the murderer violently pulled the victim's hair and pressed the red-hot muzzle against his forehead. There was a sizzling sound. Wait a minute, I surrender. Don't kill me. Wait a minute. Mirando screamed. His pupils kept turning and trembling. It's better to be alive than dead, right? You must be from the Astronomy Society, right? Spare my life. I know a lot of secrets, a lot of people's secrets. Not only Rotten Dream, but also several churches of the rancher. I know where all of them are. Also Dracula's miracle mark. His formula, I can give them all to you. In the silence, there seemed to be some movement. Huaishur was silent, as if he was thinking. The muzzle of the gun was raised, raised, and lowered again. He was hesitant. Soon, the identity of the victim was marked on the screen. Next to it was a photo and a wanted notice from the bureau. Haha, young man, you're quite lucky. The person in charge of the L4 building raised his eyebrows. Looks like we've caught a big fish. Young people are still too inexperienced. arrange for the transfer of manpower. The man smoking said cautiously, "If Miranda escapes, I'm afraid we'll have to spend a lot more effort." "Didn't you say to observe?" "I think this is a good opportunity," another person calmly suggested. "Rotten Dream has already been taken in by the Continuation Academy. A single officiant won't be able to make any waves." After Rotten Dream had been completely overturned, a mere finite society was nothing to the Bureau. It wasn't worth mentioning at all. What they were curious about at the moment was how the young man in front of them would make his choice. Would he carefully kill the enemy without leaving any hidden dangers? Or would he violently blast this long-winded fellow to smithereens? Or would he spare his life like a cat playing with a mouse, casually extinguishing all possibilities of escape? Or, if he was careless, the enemy would escape. No matter what choice he made, they would be able to see something. Or perhaps they wanted to know what exactly was he hesitating about. In the silence, there was only the sound of the wreckage of the Stellaris burning. Sweat dripped down from Mirando's forehead drop by drop. He carefully raised his eyes and peeked at Weischer's expression. In the flickering light of the fire, the shadow of that face was constantly changing. It was difficult to see what he was thinking. Under the burn scar, the fascia of his right leg was slowly reconnecting. As long as he gathered some more strength, he would be able to break free from this rope and escape. However, he still couldn't find any opportunity under the aim of that pistol. "Hey, why sure?" Beelzebub urged unhappily. "Why are you still dawdling? Do you really believe this guy's bullsh *T? "No, I just feel something doesn't seem right." Weischer sighed. He squatted down and studied Mirando in front of him and the pistol in his hand. "It doesn't feel right. You know that, right?" The Lord of the Fly rolled his eyes. "You're just killing a piece of trash. Do you want to taste the taste of first love? No, I mean, didn't this guy just surrender to the Astronomy Society?" Weischer raised his hand that was holding the gun and scratched his head. Then he put the gun down and pointed at Mirando's shocked face. Then I remembered. Oh, I'm the only one left from the Astronomy Society. That means I'll be representing the Astronomy Society. I've already been paid so much. I can't tarnish the reputation of the organization. I have to think about it carefully, right? And then Beelzebub didn't even need to remind him. He had fully entered his role as the supporting actor. And then I remembered what was wrong. Weischer slapped his thigh and exclaimed excitedly, "You really have to go through the process for this kind of thing." Just as Beelzebub and Mirando were stunned, Weischer had already happily reached out and took out a book of rules for inspectors from his pocket. He flipped through the relevant procedures on the spot. Soon, the book was closed. "Okay, I know how to do it." Weischer nodded confidently. He took out a pen and paper from his saddle bag and wrote an arrest warrant on the spot. He stamped it with the seal of the Shinhai inspector and showed Mirando the black letter that was still warm. "Mirando M. Lando, you are suspected of endangering the current state, organizing an illegal church, murder, border smuggling, and other crimes. With the approval of the Astronomy Society's Shinhai branch, you are arrested today." Mirando was stunned for a moment. Then he was overjoyed and nodded crazily. "I'm willing to cooperate. I'm willing to confess. As long as you spare my life." "Very good." Weischer interrupted him and announced according to the emergency procedure on the rules, "Then you will be transferred to the border court for trial. As the only member of the Astronomy Society here, I will temporarily serve as the judge, deputy judge, and your prosecutor." He bent down and looked at Mirando's blank face. He smiled. "So, Defendant Mirando, you are convicted due to the conclusive evidence. Does the defendant's lawyer have any questions?" "There is no question. My client deserves it. Beelzebub raised his voice happily. He will definitely respect the verdict given by the jury. Very good. Huaishur took out a miniature version of the hammer of pain and knocked it on the broken carriage next to him. According to the temporary border court's verdict, Mirando, you are sentenced to death. You will be executed immediately, right now, right here. The second seal was stamped. Mirando's pupils dilated. He opened his mouth and wanted to shout, but Huaishur raised his hand and stuffed a handful of iron paste into his mouth. It stuck and quickly solidified. Only vague whimpers and roars were left. He struggled with all his might, but it was too late. The hell virus in his body was spreading rapidly, depriving him of his last strength. Amidst the burning flames, he looked up blankly. He saw the heavy steel behind the young man's back rapidly changing shape under the control of the young man's hand. It twisted and turned into a platform. Then, a ferocious frame quickly rose up. Under the suspension of the rope of sorrow, the heavy axe hung high, flashing with an angry cold light. Finally, on behalf of the Astronomy Society, I will execute the verdict on you. This is how you will be executed. In front of the guillotine, Huaishur opened his arms and happily announced to Mirando, "Behead! Woo-woo! Woo! Woo-woo-woo!" Under Huaishur's drag, Mirando tore his lips and screamed. He struggled with all his might, roaring and cursing, but he could not resist the hand that was holding him tightly. Inch by inch, he was dragged to the guillotine. Heavy shackles fell, choking his hands and neck, cutting off his last hope. "You won't have a good ending, you bastard. You're a lackey of the Astronomy Society." Mirando roared, crazily, yelling with his big mouth that was pulled to his temples. "You will definitely fall into a situation thousands of times worse than mine. You will beg for death in the abyss. You will definitely. Yes, isn't this the fair trial you've been longing for, Mirando? Isn't this a judgment made in accordance with the laws, regulations, and even your wishes?" Huaishur tilted his head, squatted down, and stared into his eyes. As he spoke, there seemed to be endless phantoms appearing behind him, indifferently looking down at the sinner on the guillotine, judging this fair trial, watching the arrival of retribution. "I'm your arrestor. I'm your judge. I'm your executioner. Mirando, you can resent, but the result will not change." Huaishur raised his finger and snapped his fingers for the last time in front of him. "Please remember, my name is Huaishur." At that moment, the heavy axe hanging above the guillotine whistled down. There was a soft click. Justice, execution. The image ended there. In the decision-making room, after witnessing Huaishur's one-stop trial service, everyone's expressions became unusually interesting, not knowing how to judge. Ahem, although the process isn't very formal, it's an emergency. The person in charge of L4 on the overhead floor narrowed his eyes and seemed to smile. "I think, at least, there's no problem with the process. But these can all be solved through learning, right? Although the judgment is lacking in consideration, as a young man, it's already done very well." The representative from the border court took a sip of tea and said calmly, "I think everything's good, but he's lacking a little experience. It just so happens that the border court is still lacking some newcomers. No, the process of his arrest is also a little informal." The person next to him raised his voice. "He must come to us for training. If he doesn't get rid of his bad habits, there will be no end to the pernicious influence. I think it's necessary for him to learn more advanced methods of execution. Well, we can have an internal exchange. It'll only take 2 months." No, the format of his arrest notice format. The people in the secretariat subconsciously opened their mouths and wanted to pull him away, but after thinking for a long time, they found that there was no F*** king problem with the format written by this little bastard, so they had no excuse to pull him away. Okay, don't quarrel. The middle-aged man at the head of the table raised his finger and knocked on the table. In the end, he's a rare and valuable talent. I believe everyone has seen his performance and conduct. As for observation and whatnot, forget about it. It's normal for young people to have some small secrets. We don't have the right to ask him to write all of it in his diary for us to see. After a pause, the middle-aged man continued, as for where he'll be transferred to, you can go down and discuss it yourselves. But it's best to see his personal development wishes. Didn't the personnel department ask him to fill in the form? The secretary was silent for a long time, and his face looked like he had eaten dog shit. He did. Okay. The middle-aged man picked up his teacup calmly. What did he fill in? Under everyone's focused gaze, the secretary picked up the form and read it with a numb face. Development expectations. Study hard, study hard. Then get admitted to the Vienna University of Music. Cough, cough. Become a useful cellist for the current situation. The middle-aged man's shoulders trembled. He held his breath and forced the tea in his mouth down. He looked up blankly. He said, cellist? Yes, cellist. The secretary repeated, get admitted to the Vienna University of Music and become a useful cellist for the current situation. Go to Vienna? Yes. The secretary nodded. Be a cellist? The middle-aged man's face looked like he was joking. He even reached out his hand and made a gesture of playing the cello. That's the violin. The person next to him corrected him. The cello is played in the arms. At this moment, everyone in the conference room suddenly had a fleeting feeling of unreality. This was definitely the first S-ranked military officer in the history of the Astronomy Society who said that he wanted to study hard and play the cello in the future. Wasn't an inspector who didn't want to be a headless demon, a good cellist? Wasn't this world a little too fantastical? Oh, they look like they're having a lot of fun. At the round table, Crow looked at the scene, not far away, and sighed softly. At this moment, on the endless ocean, outside the Stellaris, half of a carriage that had been detached from the main body drifted alone on the sea. The light was warm. It was hard to believe that such a large half of a broken carriage could still travel on the sea. In the center of the carriage, within a 2-meter radius, there was not a trace of damage. It was like a miracle blessed by the god of luck. The terrifying turmoil and explosion didn't seem to have caused any damage to this place. Even when the carriage was lifted by the explosion not long ago and fell into the sea, the entire process was smooth and gentle. Even the steaming tea in the teacups didn't spill a single drop. The remaining part of the carriage happened to block the sea breeze and maintain a suitable temperature. Even the newspaper rack next to it wasn't wet by the turbulent sea water. Sitting next to the table, people suddenly felt a sense of tranquility. A man in a gray suit sat across from her. He nibbled on the overly sweet tea and frowned. There was too much honey and sugar. He simply couldn't finish it. He put down the biscuit in his hand, wiped his mouth, and drank the last of the tea in the cup. He sighed softly. Crow looked over and asked curiously, "Are you leaving?" "Yes, I've already done my duty." The man in gray rummaged through his pocket and took out a small bag. He put it on the table. "This is for you. He should need it." The small transparent plastic bag contained a white bone object the size of a little finger. It looked like a chicken bone. The remains of an evil creature? Crow was surprised. "Did you pull this out of the rotten dream specifically for him? It seems like you got along very well with my contractor." "It's just a favor. Please don't mind it." The man in gray waved his hand embarrassedly. He stood up from the chair that was about to collapse, took down his coat and hat from the broken clothes rack, and finally picked up his briefcase from the floor that was beginning to leak water. He nodded to Crow and said goodbye. You still want to continue working? Crow said, forget it. It's meaningless. But the work is there, isn't it? The man in gray shook his head helplessly. Someone has to do it. Otherwise it will only increase. Chapter 436. Name. The next day, when Huaisher opened his eyes in the rescue team's hospital bed, he heard a voice close by. Then, he finally saw the black-hearted woman who had appeared out of nowhere. She was looking down at him with great interest. Yes, she even stepped on his face. Huaisher sighed. I say, before we go through the process, can you come down first? Wow, so cold? Crow tilted her head and looked at him. Is it because I don't give you enough benefits, or are you used to seeing wildflowers outside, so you don't think this big sister is fragrant? Next time you say something like this, can you transform into a human first? Huaisher couldn't help but sneeze. He rubbed his nose and pulled her off his face. What do you want me to say? Damn you, you still know to come back? Or should I just throw you into the pot and make black chicken soup? The heavens took pity on me. At that time, I was going to take you and run away. Who knew you would be so stubborn and rush forward? Crow turned into mist and suddenly broke away from his hand. Then she condensed on his hair and looked down at him. This time, it's purely because you're stubborn. You can't blame this big sister, right? Besides, is it not good to start a mecha? You experienced the entire plot of a Shuang novel. Huaisher rolled his eyes. Is your definition of Shuang novel different from other people's? Okay, don't be angry. Kong Kong, what did Big Sister bring you? Crow raised a claw and grabbed a plastic bag, waving it in front of him. Chicken bones? Huaisher glanced at it. Did you bring back leftovers for me? Next time, can you bring a chicken rack? At least I can use it to make soup. Use the bones of the Queen of Rotten Dreams to make soup. Crow was stunned. Are you planning to embrace the abyss directly? Even if you're stubborn, you can't be so reckless, right? What the hell? Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He couldn't believe it. Wow, have you finally found your conscience? Crow shook his head and threw the bag into Huaisher's hands. Although your evaluation of me is quite biased, and I really want to say that Sister treats you so well. In fact, this is given to you by someone else. Who? Huaisher thought for a moment and reacted. A big shot in a gray suit. That fellow, humph, more like a social animal. That's what he prepared for you. The remains of the vile creatures. The essence condensed from the lords of the swarm when they descended into physical form. It could be said that it is one of their essences. If it is used to make alchemy potions, I'm afraid it could be made into something quite incredible. And the dregs after that would be the ashes of the vile creatures you need for your ascension. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air and could not help but click his tongue. Then he began to be afraid. On the one hand, he was shocked by the nature of the ashes of the vile creatures. On the other hand, he was shocked by the need for money to buy celestial genealogy. Even if it was the leftovers after the use, the bone dregs after the soup, it was still a part of the Lords of Hell, okay? If it was placed in other genealogies, it could be directly used as the material of the level 5 stigmata. But on the road of Heaven's Inquisition, it was only one of the level 3 materials. Wasn't it a bit too exaggerated? Don't get it wrong. How can the poor version and the luxurious version be the same? Crow had long been clear about Huaisher's stingy nature. He rolled his eyes. You want to become stronger, but you don't want to pay. Where are you from? Huaisher was too lazy to refute. Anyway, he finally understood why the celestial genealogy was called the Abyss genealogy. It was simply the hell of buying money. Don't ask so much, just buy it. If you buy it, you can become stronger. If you don't buy it, you will have nothing. It was simply bloody tears. Didn't he just experience it? Osiris, who had no equipment, was beaten by Golden Dawn. But with equipment in hand, he could immediately fight the vile creatures head-on. And Osiris, who was once in his heyday, entered hell with a full set of plus 19 god equipment. It was simply like beating up a child. But from this point of view, it was quite conscientious. After all, there were not many places where you could get what you paid for. But for most people, buying money was never a problem. The problem was that there was no money to buy. Even if Weisher had just robbed a lot of money, he would feel a burst of despair when he thought about the next advancement materials. He was embarrassingly short of money. When would these days of hard labor come to an end? And the key was, how strong can I become if I buy this thing? Weisher held the remains of the vile creatures in the bag, feeling a kind of happiness of 10 consecutive deliveries. It's over. He felt that he was hopeless. From the inside out, he had turned into the shape of a corium gold. So, don't worry, the upgraded version will definitely have its benefits, Crow explained. According to my calculations, the upper limit of what you can bear now is about 1/3 of the body in the bag. Any more and you will be corroded and solidified by the abyss essence. The gains don't make up for the losses. Using the remains of the vile creatures to advance was considered the most extravagant, even in the utopia at that time. After you advance, the vitality and plague of the mountain ghost will be further improved. More importantly, the part of the Een soul will undergo a qualitative change. At that time, the black fog originally formed from the ashes will be directly given the aura of a ruler, forming a suppression on the enemy's level. Also, it can cause the Een soul's talent to undergo a qualitative change. You've struck gold. The Een soul's talent? Weisher scratched his head and thought for a long time. In the end, he checked the Book of Destiny and remembered the dark trench coat, a skill that he had long forgotten. The only skill that came with the Een soul stigmata was also a passive effect, dark stealth. Staying in a dark corner made it harder to be discovered. The darker it was, the harder it was to be discovered. It had bonuses for stealth and sneak attacks, but he seemed to have been a little too reckless recently. He hadn't used this skill in a long time. You'll know after you advance. Crow smiled mysteriously and didn't say anything else. Instead, he looked at Weisher's bedside table with interest, at the book of steel that had no sense of existence. By the way, you have a new friend. Why don't you introduce him to me? Like an illusion, when Weisher turned his head, he seemed to see the rare and silent book of steel tremble in Crow's line of sight. No, even the glass of water on the table began to shake. She looked like she was trembling in fear. Weisher was shocked. He couldn't connect it to the iron-headed young man with the foul mouth who went against Golden Dawn yesterday. Why isn't it talking? Crow turned his head curiously and asked Weisher, "Is it a little mute?" Then Beelzebub trembled even harder, but he finally made a sound. "Holy, you're holy." He changed the way he addressed Roland several times, but he didn't dare to finish his sentence. He stuttered and couldn't speak. "Oh, the child is quite polite. Just call me sister." The crow chuckled softly and waved its wings. "All right, hurry up and get some rest. Children are still growing, so they need to sleep more. Don't be idle all day and talk nonsense. Understand?" Immediately, the Book of Steel stopped moving. It began to play dead. Weisher started to have a headache. Is there something wrong with this little brother? Did he get a heat stroke? After that fierce battle, Weisher unexpectedly didn't suffer any injuries. He just didn't have enough source substance and needed to rest for a few more days. But Beelzebub's situation wasn't optimistic. As Osiris's shipboard artificial intelligence and core controller, he took on more than 80% of the pressure in place of Weisher. Now he was seriously injured. He couldn't stay online all day. He had to sleep for a long time and use Weisher's source substance to slowly recover. After charging for about 3 hours, he could come online and talk bad for 5 minutes. Fortunately, he could activate his weapon state at any time. The use of the super small judgment armament, a MIT revolver, wasn't affected, although he still needed Beelzebub to come online and control the firepower when he used the Annihilation Origin bullet at maximum power. After wasting 2 on Mirando yesterday, there were 4 left in the magazine, all of which Beelzebub had extracted from Osiris's source substance furnace when they retreated. No matter how small it was still Osiris's weapon configuration and had great destructive power. The only downside was that it consumed too much mana. Osiris could have used it like a machine gun, but with Sophia, a single bullet would have been enough to reduce him to ash, and it would have been too difficult to replenish. Beelzebub had done some calculations. If Huaishur injected most of the source substance into Lord of the Flies every night before he went to sleep without affecting his own condition, excluding the waste and consumption during the process of repairing Lord of the Flies and refining it, he could make 1 in about 2 months. The upper limit was 6. After all, there were only so many magazines. Fortunately, other than the super high output, he could use alchemy bullets at other times. This way, Huaishur wouldn't die together with the enemy with his little assets. But it was still too expensive. This special caliber and structure of bullet was completely handmade by alchemists. The complexity of the alloy was beyond the control of the hand of confinement. Even if Huaishur could buy the finished alloy and reprocess it himself, the cost would still be around 2,000 East Summer dollars per bullet. With a pull of the trigger, all 4 orders were gone. With every shot, the enemy's heart and Huaishur's heart bled together. Okay, stop being so stingy. Crow couldn't stand watching Huaishur calculate on his phone anymore. It raised its wings and patted the back of his head. Since you're fine, get up quickly and do the discharge procedures. Idiot, we're leaving. Where are we going? Huaishur asked instinctively. Then he realized, no, where am I now? Chapter 437. In the Jakarta branch of the Southeast Asian Astronomical Association, Crow rolled her eyes and urged him to get on the road. Don't dawdle. Hurry up and pack your things. I just looked at the map. From here, you can reach Madura in 2 days, then take a boat to Australia. After landing, you'll pass through the Great Rift Valley and the desert, walk in the radiation zone for a week, and follow the bay all the way to Canberra. There, you can change ships, and you'll be able to reach the South Pole. The South Pole? Huaishur was stunned. Why would I go there? I'm not going. He felt that he would not have a good time ahead. Don't talk nonsense. Let's go. Crow's words dispelled Huaishur's conflicting thoughts. The birth of life is waiting for you. Huaishur suddenly became suspicious. The birth of life was the only thing he lacked in the 4 foundations. But didn't this thing say that he had to give birth to children? But no matter how he asked, Crow did not reveal anything at all, which made him feel more and more uneasy. And why do we have to walk? Huaishur asked, can I take a plane? This was a branch of the Astronomical Association. With his current authority, he could apply for a plane to fly him there directly. Hey, you're here to travel, not to enjoy. Crow stared at him with her eyes wide open. If you don't use your feet to feel the earth, wouldn't you have come for nothing? At the mention of this, Huaishur could not help but roll his eyes. I've already wasted hundreds of thousands. Who's going to pay me back? Thinking of the $500,000 he spent on the Stellaris to buy a standing ticket, his heart bled. Crow's eyes suddenly drifted. She was too embarrassed to tell him that the ancient tourism company had already paid for it, along with a large sum of compensation, but she had already taken the money before Huaishur woke up. He was still young. What was the use of so much money? It was better to keep it for herself. When he grew up, she would return it to him. Crow lied to her conscience and said in a trembling voice, "In short, I guarantee that you won't lose anything." Hearing her words, Huaishi's heart calmed down. What else was there to say? This time, he was bound to lose. "I'll definitely give it to you, for free." The discharge procedure was easy and simple. After all, it was an internal hospital affiliated to the Astronomical Society. After a simple observation, the discharge certificate was issued. After that, Huaishi didn't even leave the room. He directly went down from the medical department on the 6th floor to the administrative department on the 4th floor. After making a registration and some simple inquiries, he was done. The staff members who connected with him expressed their admiration and praise for his mission on Stellaris. After the specific process was completed, the commendation for him would be sent to Jinling. Huaishi was feeling guilty that he had blown up Osiris, so he did not dare to ask any more questions. After realizing that everything was fine, he prepared to leave. After this mission, the higher-ups even gave him half a month's leave. It was almost a month's worth of savings. It was simply too great. When he thought about how old Fu had a pile of documents waiting for him to sign, but he couldn't find him, Huaishi became happier. She also blocked old Fu's phone number. After rejecting the branch's express flight back to Jinling for free, Huaishi picked up his saddlebag and was ready to leave. Half an hour later, a young lady mustered up the courage to open the door of the ward. She only saw an empty bed and a nurse who was cleaning up. "Oh, he's gone," said Yuan Zhao, who was leaning on crutches. He couldn't hold back his laughter. After he finished laughing, he raised his head and found that his cousin was looking straight at him. Then, in the midst of the pain, he noticed that Yuan was also smiling. She raised the Mountain King's sword. Yuan Zhao swallowed his saliva. "Sister Yuan, have mercy." Bang. "Okay, what are we going to do next?" Huaishi stood at the entrance of the Astronomical Society's office building. He looked around the lush city of Jakarta and saw people coming and going on the streets. Strictly speaking, this was the first time he had gone abroad in real life. The scenery that greeted him was completely different from that of the eastern summer. The smell and the wind also became unfamiliar. It was as if he had suddenly been thrown into another world, but it was different from the perilous hell and the strange and complicated borders. He was actually at a loss of what to do. He didn't know what to do next. Call a car? He should be looking for a car, but shouldn't he purchase some supplies first? He didn't have much food in his bag, and he should stock up on water. Should he buy some bullets? "Come on, you're in the present, okay?" Crow sighed on his shoulder. "The Astronomical Society is still here. The sky won't fall. You don't have to be so careful. Where did your PTSD come from?" Bang! The door of a car in the distance suddenly closed, making a dull sound. Huaishi's hand subconsciously pressed on the saddlebag and touched the hilt of the sword of virtue. After Huaishi realized what happened, he awkwardly moved his hand away. He felt like he was Tarzan, out of place in the surrounding environment. "Can you relax a little?" Crow sighed. "Forget it. Listen to my instructions first. Go forward. Turn left." 15 minutes later, Huaishi walked out of the shop wearing a flowery shirt, big pants, sunglasses, and a newly bought backpack. He also held a map in his hand. It was a standard tourist look. It was particularly eye-catching, but at least it was better than his original look of being armed to the teeth. The windbreaker, leather boots, emergency vest, weapons, and so on had been stuffed into the backpack with the saddlebag, but Huaishi always wanted to touch it from time to time. So he adjusted the position so that it could be taken out at any time. After repeatedly confirming that everything was on him, he was a little relieved. He took the map and looked around. Then what? What do I do? Whatever I want to do. Crow tilted his head and looked at him. Isn't traveling like this? Go, have fun, eat something good, be good. Huaisha frowned. It's just a tour? Yes. Crow nodded. Is there really no other trap? Huaisha was doubtful. Someone won't suddenly jump out to kill me, and I won't inexplicably stay in the same car with a cult member, and a bomb won't suddenly fall from the sky while I'm walking. Would you believe me if I said there's really nothing? Crow looked at him, then asked again, if there's really nothing, will you be able to relax? Huaisha? After a long silence, Huaisha sighed helplessly. I'll try. Okay, then let's make a deal. Crow raised his paw and pressed it on the backpack, directly locking a seal on the zipper, sealing all of Huaisha's equipment. She said seriously, from now on, you can only use the $4,000 in your pocket. Unless it's necessary, and I'm talking about the kind of emergency, you're not allowed to use the Ascendant's abilities, weapons, or even the sacred mark. How about trying to be an ordinary tourist? I'll try my best. After Huaisha finished speaking, he felt a little guilty. After leaving those things, he felt as if he had been beaten back to his original form. No, it should be said that he seemed to be weaker than before. More panic. He was helpless and at a loss for what to do in this strange world. When he had nothing, he was not afraid of this world, because this world could not take anything away from him except for killing him. But now that his life had finally begun, he began to panic about the malice hidden in the darkness. He did not even know how to be a tourist. In this strange country, he felt confused and had no idea where to start. Can you give me a hint? He looked back at Crow. Life is not easy, Crow sighed. Okay, the last reminder from the easy mode. She said, look at the map and head towards the direction of Canberra. Find a place you're interested in, go sightseeing, travel on foot, eat what the people here eat, drink the water here, sleep in the youth hotels or under the bridges on the streets in the wilderness. Rely on your appearance to hitch a ride, rely on your strength to play the piano, cheat, and work properly as long as you head towards the South Pole. Everything else is up to you. Pausing for a moment, she said seriously, if you really can't put your heart at ease and want to do something, then go buy a shovel and seeds. Shovel? Huaisha was confused. What for? Planting trees, the old profession of a mountain ghost. Crow raised its wings and rubbed his hair. Learn to enjoy the real life of a ascendant little devil. You've been out of touch with this world for too long. What kind of suggestion is this? Buy a shovel in Southeast Asia? Plant trees? Isn't this a bit too fantastical? Forget it. At least it's better than being clueless. 10 minutes later, a brand new folding shovel was hanging on Huaisha's backpack. He managed to get it by speaking Latin, Dongsha, and a little bit of Javanese by analogy with the boss. At least it was cheaper by half. Although the boss saw his outfit and looked at him strangely after hearing that he, a tourist, wanted to buy a shovel, he came up with some strange stories. But at least he bought the shovel. He touched his pocket and had a little more than 5,100 US dollars left, which was almost 20,000 Dongsha yuan. If he was frugal with eating and sleeping, he didn't know how much he could save, and he didn't know if this money was enough for him to go all the way to the South Pole. It seemed that the task suddenly became difficult. On the bright side, at least he had saved the distance from Dongsha to Indonesia. Comforting himself like this, he flipped through the introduction in the tourist brochure. After reading it several times, he considered whether to go to an aquarium. Although it was not normal to visit an aquarium here, Huaisha was quite curious. He had never been to that kind of place even once. Crow leaned on his backpack, lazily basking in the sun, and followed him all the way through the streets. In this way, they embarked on the road ahead. It seemed a bit difficult, but at the same time, it was a very real journey. It had nothing to do with saving the world, and it had nothing to do with other people's joys and sorrows. There were no difficult death missions or dangerous situations. Huaishur's first long-distance trip in his life began. Since he had nothing to do, and if he really felt too empty, he might as well train a bit. In his country, all of the large plantations were tightly controlled by Emperor Qing's faction. Those green demons wanted nothing more than to plant poplar trees all over the Gobi Desert. As a military officer of the Astronomy Association, taking meat from someone else's bowl was quite shameless. Even if they didn't mind having more people in the same field helping out, Huaishur didn't want to freeload off of their correction points. All he could do was stroll around Qingxiu Mountain behind his house every day and take care of the disputes between the trees. At the very least, he could act as a forest ranger. Indonesia, on the other hand, was different. Everywhere was unclaimed land. Whether or not there was anyone managing it didn't matter. Huaishur could do whatever he wanted and experiment on a large scale. In any case, he wouldn't be able to do anything bad. If he did, he could just slap his butt and leave. With his ability, he couldn't get a vast desert. At most, he could get some weeds to grow in people's courtyards. Could the Indonesian ascendants directly complain about him to the Astronomy Association? In any case, he wasn't afraid of a complaint. Have you experienced the benefits of the path of destiny? Crow chuckled. Starting from Ghost, this type of stigmata is all support type. It's the type that allows you to gain experience. If it's the path of eternity, if you want to reach Osiris from the fourth step, you'll have to mechanize the entire hell. Unlike Mountain Ghost, planting a tree will yield a tree's fruit. Adjusting a forest will yield a forest's harvest. As long as the forest is still there, the correction points will be endless. No matter how small it is, as long as there are enough of them, you'll be able to gain a lot over time. There's no need to worry about the problem of correction points. There are some silly newbies who just want to be cool, powerful, and destructive. They don't listen to advice at all. After having fun, they'll be in trouble. Sigh. Almost all of the stigmata had different requirements for growth. There was no doubt that support-type stigmata were the easiest to grow. Just by looking at how Huaishur had reached the third step in 4 months, one could see how fast it was. Functional stigmatas were second only to support-type stigmatas. If you want to create something, change something, or process something, you'll have to use your stigmata to influence the outside world. You'll get a reward for your hard work. It belonged to the type of stigmatas that could be promoted as long as you put in a lot of effort. Offensive or invasive stigmatas were miserable. Without exception, most of them had to be promoted through killing and destruction. If you weren't careful, you'd receive a black letter from the Astronomy Association and be suppressed by the good brothers of the Social Security Bureau. It was very easy for the whole village to survive, but before that, he was afraid that the whole village would have been killed by the ascendants who had gone mad. Yuan Zhao was able to reach the third step at the age of 14. It was definitely related to his position in the Social Security Bureau. With his big cousin's help, the Pegasus family's stigmata would definitely improve at a frightening speed. Rushing to the battlefield to complete their mission, at worst, They could rely on their speed to enter and exit the enemy 7 times. They could easily gain a lot. In comparison, another acquaintance, the Riken family's little Amber, was especially pitiful. The essence of the stigmata prajna was an evil spirit of jealousy and loneliness. If it wanted to grow, it needed to constantly experience related feelings. If there was a scumbag who was willing to cooperate with her, talk to her as a friend, and then quietly let her find out that he cheated on her, as long as she killed the scumbag and the third party, she might be able to kill them all at once. Obviously, the performance that Huaishir was witnessing at the moment was the scene of another ascendant leveling up. Mermaids were very common stigmatas in the water. Regardless of the difference between the lineages, their abilities were ultimately marine. This one should be a cultivator who was inclined to control aquatic creatures. If they could break through the 4th or 5th step in the future, they would probably have to participate in the annual fishing season and the ecological balance in the sea. At that time, they might even become the sea god of Indonesia. Coming to the aquarium on a whim, he was able to see the scene of another ascendant leveling up. He had to say that he was lucky. However, Huaishir didn't participate in it. Promising Crow that he wouldn't take the initiative to use his ascendant abilities was one thing, but the most important thing was that his origin substance was a highly toxic negative energy. If he were to get mixed in, he was afraid that the entire aquarium, including the mermaids, would start foaming at the mouth. In less than 2 hours, the Indonesian government would announce that they had been attacked by terrorists. At that time, Huaishir would have to prepare to go to the border court. After he finished watching and walked out of the aquarium with satisfaction, he saw the zookeeper, who had already changed his clothes, standing at the entrance. The zookeeper waved at him. He was dressed in a suit, looking like a business elite. It was almost impossible to associate him with the zookeeper from before. "Hello, are you a foreign ascendant?" The dark-skinned, middle-aged man took the initiative to extend his hand, expressing his goodwill. He looked at the outdoor seats of the nearby coffee shop and asked in fluent Latin, "Do you have time to drink coffee with me, sir?" "Ah." Chapter 439. Tyler. As soon as he sat down, the ascender introduced himself. "This is my surname. You can call me Tyler. As you can see, I'm working in this aquarium to improve myself." Huaishir." Huaishir shook hands with him again. "Dongxia, are you here for a trip?" "Sort of." Huaishir patted the backpack next to him and shrugged. "Traveling on a budget. It may be a bit presumptuous. Can you take a look at this?" Before Huaishir asked, Tyler took out a brochure from the bag next to him and offered it with both hands. "Coral Reef. Protection Plan?" Huaishir raised his eyebrows curiously and looked at the back of the brochure. The producer was the Southeast Asian Marine Protection Association, and Tyler's name was also listed among the honorary vice presidents. The brochure also described how the local corals in Indonesia would be affected by the changing climate. It has gone from more than 1,000 species to less than 700. After Huaishir finished reading, Tyler said cautiously, "If this continues, I'm afraid the local coral population will be completely extinct. Since the ecological pollution in Australia, some of the coral samples we tried to preserve are also in a precarious state." Like a passionate salesman, once he opened his mouth, he kept talking about the pollution and impact of the local marine environment, as well as their response measures and rescue operations over the years. It was completely beyond Huaishir's expectations. He didn't know why Tyler told him this. When Tarar said that his mouth was dry and he picked up the coffee and found that he had finished it, he put down the cup awkwardly. "Sorry, I can't stop talking about this." It doesn't matter. In fact, I didn't pay attention to this." Huaishir scratched his head. He didn't notice the malice from Tyler, and when he spoke, the excitement and enthusiasm revealed were completely undisguised. This man was indeed sincere about his actions to protect the marine environment of his homeland. It was rare to see such sincerity. Moreover, while he was talking, Huaishur had already eaten all the food in the coffee shop. Yes, I'm half full. It's just that. Huaishur scratched his head. You're telling me all this because you need my help? If that's the case, there's nothing I can do. He only had around 4,000 renminbi on him. It wasn't even enough for him to survive until he reached the South Pole. How would he have the time to protect Indonesia's marine environment? No. Hearing that he wanted to pay, Tyler quickly waved his hand and refused. We have formal fundraising activities and sponsors for the public. We don't need this kind of private donation. It's illegal and improper. I mean, if someone tries to persuade you, you should refuse and report it to the police. Huaishur was stunned. Then Tyler took out an invitation letter and a small coral badge from his bag and pushed them over the table. Thank you for your willingness to understand our business. Could you please join us? Tyler was afraid that Huaishur would misunderstand, so he quickly said, the members of the Marine Conservation Association have no obligations or restrictions. They also don't need to pay any fees. I mean, if you are interested, you can join us. We will regularly organize diving and various activities. Of course, it doesn't matter if you participate or not. Huaishur was puzzled. Then what do you want me to do? To be honest, we need to increase our international influence. If you can pay more attention to Indonesia's marine environment in the future, just say a few words for it will be enough. Tyler sighed, helplessly. The Australian fishing fleet is getting more and more excessive year after year. There is also the pollution from their industrial zone. We can only fight for international support and support. Although I don't understand, I just need to say a few words for you, right? Huaishur didn't mind. In fact, he was even more surprised that Tyler had spent so much time on such a trivial matter. That's great. Tyler looked at the small badge that Huaishur accepted and nodded with satisfaction. After all, many foreign ascenders don't care much about the ecological environment. You need any help? If you don't mind, I can find you a pretty good tour guide. No need. Huaishur waved his hand. If he asked, Tyler would certainly not mind such a small amount of money. Listening to his tone, he had shares in the aquarium behind him. He was extremely rich and belonged to the nouveau riche class. But in this case, he lost the original intention of Crow. He wanted to try to live in the present world with his own ability without the help of others and extraordinary strength. Whether it was playing the violin or buying a dining car all the way to Canberra, he tried to return to a normal life. Yes, that's right. This is my deep meaning. You actually understand. The black-hearted woman proudly boasted without any modesty. Immediately, her tone changed slightly, but you don't have to be too deliberate. Huaishur was puzzled. Didn't you see it? Crow said, in the final analysis, the life of an ascender and the life of an ordinary person, isn't it your life? It's all part of your life. There's no need to forcibly separate it. Isn't the one in front of you very good? There's no need to indulge in fighting and killing. As a normal ascender, can't you make your own career and have your own life? You just helped him. If you have any doubts, you can ask him. Huaishur was silent for a long time. Tyler noticed the change in his expression and stopped talking. Instead, he looked at him curiously. He didn't understand what the young ascender in front of him was hesitating about. It's like this. Huaishur thought for a moment and asked, in your opinion, Mr. Tyler, what is the life of an ascender? Tyler seemed to be at a loss. Huaishur thought for a moment and asked softly, what is the normal life of an ascender? So that's how it is. I understand. After thinking for a long time, Tyler nodded seriously. He understood the confusion of the young man in front of him, so he smiled and said, Mr. Weischer, what do you think of ascension? Do you think that ascension is a good thing? Tyler asked seriously. It does bring power, but it also brings danger, doesn't it? What do you think of your own nature's ascension? To be honest, I haven't thought about it. Weischer shook his head awkwardly, but I think that this may be a turning point in my life. It's my good luck. Luck? Many people have this idea, and some people think that it's the devil's curse. Tyler nodded in agreement. However, in my opinion, ascension doesn't give us power, but power chooses us. What do you mean? This is a talent, Mr. Weischer. A talent that can make up for your lack and give you the ability to realize your dreams. Tyler raised his hand and ordered another cup of coffee. After sorting out his thoughts, he said, I'm the son of a fisherman. I have 6 older brothers and 1 younger brother. To be honest, my childhood was not happy. This may be one of the reasons for my ascension, but I have no resentment toward my family. It's not easy for my parents to raise us. I'm not qualified to ask for more things. I don't have a TV, no games, and no mobile phone. The only place that can make me feel relaxed is the sea. Many times when I feel pain, I will dive and swim in the sea, looking at the beautiful schools of fish and corals. The world in the sea is so quiet and vast. Just by looking at it, I can feel a sense of happiness. He said, I'm eager to be a part of it. Until one day, when I was diving, I dived to a dangerous depth. When I felt suffocated, it was too late. At the most desperate moment, I saw a huge whale. It was a white whale. Tyler smiled and said, It didn't save me. It didn't even notice me. It didn't care about me, a dying human. It rose from the deep sea like a mountain, with a song like the tide. Its white body was lonely and huge. It rose, sang, passed through the forest like coral, and disappeared into the depths of the sea. To be honest, I was stunned at that time. Recalling the past, he said, seriously, I even forgot that I was drowning, forgot that I was about to die, because it was too beautiful, like a bubble in eternal time. It made me feel that if I could see such a scene, even if I died, it wouldn't be a pity. By the time I realized what was going on, I was already dragged onto the boat by my father. My father beat me violently and told me that I almost died. He also warned me not to get on his boat in the future and not to be a fisherman like him. He told me to go back to school and prepare for the exam. But I knew that I was different. He said, I have witnessed the beauty of this world. After I graduated from university, I met my former teacher. Only then did I know that I had become a sublimator. After some things, I became a merman. I got the ability to embrace the sea. Tyler crossed his fingers and looked at him seriously. I believe that this is a blessing from fate, giving me the opportunity to realize my dream. Now, I realize my dream. I can swim in the sea with them. I also have to protect their world from being destroyed by human greed. This is my life. The life of a sublimator is no different from that of ordinary people. Mr. Weischer. He looked into Weischer's eyes and said word by word, the key is, what kind of person do you want to be, young sublimator? You feel lost about your life and everything you have, don't you? The impact of sublimate on you is too great, so great that you get lost in it and don't know where to go. You feel that you are leaving the earth and floating to a place you don't understand. This is not because the world has abandoned you, but because you haven't found the place you should be. He raised his hand and pointed at Weischer. He said seriously, so you shouldn't learn from others, but ask yourself. Mr. Weischer, where do you want to go? Weischer was stunned for a long time. He suddenly understood. He suddenly slapped his thigh. He finally found the answer. I don't know, he answered with a trembling voice. Chapter 440. Apart from power, apart from the stigmata apart from the soul. There was indeed a certain difference between ascenders and ordinary people. Perhaps before they embraced the miracle from hell, were entrusted with heavy responsibilities, or simply did whatever they wanted, they were already different from ordinary people. According to the statistics and analysis of the Astronomy Society, those with firm beliefs, goals, and persistence in their hearts were relatively easier to succeed in the crisis and trial brought about by ascension. In fact, there was also a part of the survivor bias. After all, when facing the painful climb of leaving the Silver Sea, firm willpower often allowed people to last longer. And there was no doubt that ascension would change people. After personally experiencing the kind of limitless rebirth that was close to death, ascenders would more or less have some understanding. After no longer having to worry about survival, they would have more time to examine themselves, everything they faced, and then began to think about life. This led to a large number of idealists among the ascendants. The only difference was the degree of idealism and the degree of persistence in their ideas. Some people might be too lazy to take action, while others were often hopelessly persistent. The sublimation of one's nature brought not only power, but also new possibilities and choices for ascenders. Now that you have power and the qualifications to indulge, you can try a new life at will. After all, the world was so big that it could accommodate many heroes, scum, bystanders, and even more ambitious people. So, what kind of person do you want to be? Huaisher thought about this question blankly, but found that he couldn't find an answer that could convince himself. The only thing he could say with confidence was, "I don't know." He once had a salted fish dream: to live hard, to play the violin well, to rely on his own efforts to walk into Vienna openly, to marry a woman who loved him, and then to renovate his family's old house. Even if he couldn't make much money and couldn't achieve much in life, he had to live a new life with his head held high. But now, this goal that he expected to spend a lifetime to achieve suddenly seemed to be close at hand. Now he didn't have to worry about living, and even became a disaster musician. The Chalcedony Hall was well renovated, and even the family he had lost had returned to his side. Not only had he entered the card pool while he was still alive, but he had also not been miserably feminized. Chef from the Abyss, calamity musician, legendary investigator, Prince of Paradise, nemesis of the Green Sun, Anointed One. A whole bunch of titles that were neither here nor there were there. All of a sudden, he looked dignified and incomparably dazzling. It was as if he had become an extraordinary person. However, it was only when he occasionally looked for a mirror that he could see his own face, which still had traces of the past. But it was completely different from the past. Even though his love for art had not diminished in the slightest, he could no longer return to a life where he could feel satisfied just by playing the piano. When he realized this, he became even more confused. He didn't know where to go. Who was he? He was Huaisher, the inspector of Xinhai of the Astronomical Society, the traitor with the Book of Destiny, the Eagle Claw son of the Central Bureau, the soon-to-be-has-been Elysium, the temporary driver of Bahamut and Osiris, the guardian of heaven, the heir of the Utopia, with so many titles attached to his head. The part that originally belonged to him gradually thinned out. If I can't see it anymore, Huaisher fell into deep thought. Forgive me for being presumptuous, Mr. Huaisher. Tylerd looked at Huaisher's appearance and seemed to be curious. May I ask your age? 17 years old. Huaisher replied. Tylerd was stunned. He was dumbfounded. Although he knew that the person in front of him was a confused young man, he did not expect him to be so young. The effect of yesterday's phantom could make Huaisher look more mature and reliable than he actually was. He could maintain a stable state of spirit and would not be easily affected by the surrounding environment. However, he really did not expect Huaisher to be so young. This is really, he was stunned for a long time before he smiled bitterly and shrugged. To be honest, this is completely beyond my expectations. However, I feel that there is no need to worry about those problems now. Huh. Huaisher was puzzled. After all, you are only 17 years old, aren't you? Tyler laughed. There is still a lot of time to think. The world still has room for tolerance for you. He looked at Huaisher with astonishment and amazement in his eyes. He no longer concealed his envy. It was good to be young. Being young was the greatest asset. He still had opportunities to make mistakes, room for naivety, and more time for him to think and revise, allowing him to make choices calmly. It was really good. What I just said is just a one-sided talk. You still have more time to find more answers and see more places in the world. Tyler thought for a moment and said seriously, however, I can help you with a small favor here. With that, he pointed to the shovel hanging next to Huaisher's backpack. If my feeling is correct, you should be a plant-type stigmata, right? Tyler said, if you want to earn some correction points on the way, I have a good job here. Huh. Huaisher looked up curiously, only to see Tyler get up, pick up the bag, and invite him again. It's time for dinner. You mind joining us? I can call another friend. He has a bad temper. I hope you don't mind. He had nothing to do anyway. Besides, Huaisher also wanted to know what kind of job Tyler was talking about. Tyler drove them all the way out of the city and soon reached the wilderness. Contrary to Tyler's expectations, Huaisher was not worried at all. Many of the explanations he had prepared in advance were not of any use to her. Huaisher did not think that Tyler had any bad intentions. After all, the combat effectiveness of the two people was not at the same level. Moreover, he did not feel that Tyler had any malice toward him. He was just curious about where he was going to take him. They had already gone on the mountain road and went directly into the deep mountains and forests. After a while, he saw the faint light in front and the smell of logs outside the car window. Many large trucks were parked here. It was quite busy under the lights in the distance. It was a logging site. The sign of the Forestry Association was hanging at the door. Tyler had obviously been here many times and was familiar with the place. There were many workers who greeted him, and he responded enthusiastically one by one. He directly ordered 2 dinners from the cafeteria and then unceremoniously pushed open the door of an office. He did not care if there was no one inside, sat down directly, and poured water for Huaisher. The manager here and I are acquaintances from the Environmental Protection Conference. Don't be an outsider. Just sit anywhere. Huaisher found a place to sit down and looked around. It was obviously a rough man's office. God knows how long it had not been cleaned up. There were footprints everywhere on the floor, and things were in a mess. There were several animal skulls hanging on the wall, but they had not been cleaned for a long time. They were all gray. There were tools everywhere, chainsaws, hammers, axes, nails. There was a bicycle in the corner. God knows how long it had been since it was ridden. There was also a half-dismantled motorcycle in the middle of the room. There were parts everywhere on the ground, and the smell of engine oil was strong. In the entire room, there was only one family portrait that was clean. It had been cleaned frequently. Soon, the workers brought the food. There were a total of 3 servings. The food in the logging site was naturally not good, but it was good in large quantities, and there was enough meat. Without waiting for everyone to arrive, Tyler called out to Huaisher to eat. Halfway through the meal, someone pushed the door and came in. Huaisher raised her head to take a look at the bowl in her hand and understood. A burly middle-aged man, with stubble on his face, with the smell of engine oil, and with stubble on his body, walked in with heavy footsteps. He was obviously angry. After coming in, he could no longer suppress his anger. He threw the keys and gloves on the table and cursed in Javanese. This group of damned foreign species, damn Ingzhou people, damn those bastards. Do you know how they fooled me? They said they were doing it, and they would definitely discuss it at the meeting. He complained to Tylerd. Discuss? What's with the discussion? If they were really useful, there would be no need to import 80% of the wood every year. This group of damn profiteers only want to lower the price. They only want to see us be unlucky. Hey, calm down, calm down. Tylerd put down the fork and pointed at Huaisher. I brought a friend here. Huaisher looked at the middle-aged man and found that he was a sender, and Huaisher was quite familiar with his stigmata, druid genealogy, willow man. He used this disguise when he was cheating others some time ago. It was obvious that they were genuine goods and were different from his counterfeit goods. The middle-aged man also looked at him, frowned, and asked rudely, "Who is he?" Tylerd wiped his mouth. "Aren't you busy recently? I'll introduce someone to help you." "A child?" The middle-aged man snorted. "What's the use? I don't want it." "Hey, listen, my friend, I'm here to help, not to cause trouble." Tylerd raised a finger and said seriously, "You can refuse, but at least don't vent your anger on us like you did to those Ingzhou people." After a moment of silence, although there was still anger, the middle-aged man couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. "Well, I'm sorry, this is my fault. 2 of you have some wine, it's my treat." He pulled out a bottle of liquor from the shelf, poured 3 glasses, and put them on the table. At the same time, he took out a rattan-like plant from his pocket and put it in front of Huaisher. Huaisher lowered her head to take a look and understood. Ingzhou Dragon Mistletoe. Chapter 441. In any case, he was still a mountain ghost and a part-time apprentice-level alchemist. Even if he specialized in metals, he still had some understanding of other common materials. After discovering that Huaisher was not the kind of newbie who knew nothing, the middle-aged man's expression suddenly relaxed a little. Yes, he directly took a big gulp from the bottle, wiped his mouth, and sighed unhappily. They grow everywhere. It's especially annoying this year. There are so damn many. Invasive species. Huaisher could understand. Although this thing was useful, if it wasn't handled properly, it could grow everywhere and even squeeze out the living space of other plants. "Is there no native species that can be targeted?" he asked. The bastards from the Ministry of Ecology introduced new species and eliminated more than half of the native woodlice. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so annoying this year. At this point, the middle-aged man awkwardly patted his head and stretched out his hand to Huaisher. "How should I address you?" "Huaisher." Huaisher shook hands with him and heard his name. "Ollie, just call me Ollie. I'm sorry to treat you as an ignorant and incompetent guy." "It's okay." Huaisher could understand that the other party regarded him as a guy who relied on his face to make a living. He did not care, but asked directly, "I heard you have a job here." "Yes." Ollie nodded and pointed to the dragon mistletoe. "To deal with this." "You mean to pinch off the dragon mistletoe here?" "You can't pinch it." Ollie shook his head. "Those damn things are growing crazy now. Even if all the ascendants of the Forestry Association are mobilized, they can't be dealt with. We can only find a way to cultivate its natural enemy first." As he said, he took out his glasses from his pocket, put them on, and took out a book. He opened it and looked at the pile of to-do items on it, and asked, "What kind of job do you want?" "Odd jobs will do," Huaisher said. "It's best if it's effortless." "Is there such a job?" "There is, but it won't make much money. In fact, it's just a side job." Huaisher shrugged. "I plan to go from Jakarta to Madura. It's best if you can help on the way." Ollie fell silent. Soon, he raised his head to look outside the wooden house and shouted, "Tao Fei Ku! Tao Fei Ku!" bring me a jar of the Nubiha seeds." His voice was so loud that a layer of dust fell from the beam. Soon, a young man came in with an aluminum box the size of a tea can and placed it in front of Huaishur. When he opened it, he saw that it was filled with rice-sized seeds that looked like grass seeds. "What is this?" Huaishur did not recognize him. "Preparations for the follow-up work," Ali explained. "Before a new species of woodlouse is bred, we need to delay the effects of the dragon mistletoe. It's what the druids use to fertilize the soil. It grows tall and dies quickly, but it's hard to live." As he spoke, he looked at Huaishur and did not say anything else. It was as if he was examining his capabilities. "Can you plant it?" Huaishur touched his pocket and took out a pair of tweezers from his tool bag. He picked one and placed it in his palm to observe it carefully. He had never seen this thing before, so he could not guarantee it. But to his surprise, when he rubbed his fingers together and stained them with some of Huaishur's sweat, the seed sprouted. He did not even use the ability of the mountain ghost. He breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. "It's not that hard to live." After a brief silence, Ali finally put away the astonishment in his eyes and carefully looked at Huaishur. After a long time, he nodded. "Well, since Tyler introduced you, then with his guarantee, you don't have to sign the contract." Ali nodded and asked, "When can we start work?" "Any time." Huaishur replied. He reached out and took out his ID from his trouser pocket. "Also, there's no need to trouble Mr. Tyler to guarantee. I have something that can prove my identity and credibility." It was an exquisite ID with a black cover. It was engraved with the coat of arms of the present realm surrounded by thorns. After opening it, there was a frontal photo of Huaishur and the Astronomy Association's piece of seal. It proved his identity as a registered military officer and also gave him the right to carry weapons and walk freely between the present realm, the border, and hell. Ali gasped and froze on the spot. Tyler was not much better. His hand almost shook out the wine in the cup. The two of them looked at each other in disbelief. "How did you get such a big shot to come over and help you? I didn't know that the confused little brother I met by chance was from the Astronomy Association." Their expressions suddenly became very interesting. Fortunately, they did not have any prejudice or conflict against Huaishur, a certified executioner. After all, in Indonesia, there were no major genealogies. The only thing that could ensure the basic human rights and life of the ascendants was the rules set by the Astronomy Association. This was equivalent to a warm-hearted old man introducing a young man to do odd jobs at his old acquaintance's place. But he did not expect that the young man who came to carry bricks was a passing criminal police captain looking at their hesitant looks. Huaishur held back his laughter. The thought of pretending to be a foreigner in the dark corner of his heart was satisfied. Ahem, since he's from the Astronomy Association, there's naturally no need to worry. After a long time, Ali answered awkwardly and pushed the box over. "You just have to find a place to plant these along the way. I can pay you in advance. How much do you want?" "If it's just throwing a few seeds along the way, it won't take much effort." Huaishur held the box and pondered for a moment before saying, "If you really want to pay me, then answer a question of mine." He looked at Ali in front of him and asked seriously, "In your opinion, what does it mean to be an ascendant?" Ali looked back at Tyler and asked in a low voice, "Where did you find this poet?" Young people are always full of curiosity about the world. Tyler shrugged. He needs the insights of some seniors. "At least, I hope you won't be stingy with your words." Ali shrugged and shook his head as if he had lost to him. "It doesn't mean anything." Huaishur didn't say anything else. He just looked at him with a calm and indifferent expression and waited patiently until he couldn't keep his face straight anymore. He suppressed his irritation and took a deep breath. "Well, Although I don't know what your astronomy association is thinking, in my opinion, being an ascendant means nothing to me. It's just a job. You understand? He pointed to the mess in the office. I went from being a drunken forest keeper to running a sawmill. I have to take care of my old brothers who lost their jobs and find ways to maintain the ecological balance in the forest. It's too troublesome, young man. It's too troublesome. Didn't you make any money? Weisher asked. So what if I did? Ollie was amused and pointed outside the house. What's the use of money in this wilderness? I use public funds to call a woman to come to my door once a week and double the tip. But what about more? This is the mountain, young man. There's nothing that doesn't need money more than a lumberjack. Weisher was stunned for a long time. Hasn't your life changed at all? Yes, it has changed a lot. But when it really needs to change, what can it change? In front of Weisher, Ollie turned his arm into a thick branch. Under the thick bark, there was amazing power. What was more frightening was that the whole sawmill and the whole forest were faintly resonating with him. This was his home ground. This is power. It's amazing. But what's the use of it? Ollie sneered and asked, can it make my ex-wife change her mind after I broke her heart? Can it make my 2 children believe that their father really loves them from the bottom of his heart? My eldest son and youngest daughter don't even want to have a meal with me. In their eyes, I will always be the father who brought fear and pain to them after drinking, a trouble that only brings shame. Yes, I know. I deserve it. Young man, they hate me and don't even want to invite me to their wedding. This is not something that can be changed by power and miracle. Unless I go back in time and beat up that bastard named Ollie 20 years ago and told that idiot to cherish everything he had. But even if I go back in time, can I face them? I screwed up once, twice, and all my chances of turning things around. When I began to regret it, it was already too late. Ollie's fingers stretched out and rolled up the liquor on the table. He raised his head and drank it all. Then he threw the bottle out of the window in annoyance and laid it on the chair. Staring at the picture frame on the table, his former family, he became tired and helpless. He laughed self-deprecatingly. Life is not something that can be changed by power, is it? Weisher was speechless. This is the answer you want, Mr. Weisher. I have made a fool of myself in front of a young man I met for the first time. Now, please give me a little bit of the last fig leaf. Take your reward and leave quickly. Ollie took out a car key from his pocket and placed it on the table. There is a car outside. It has been filled with gas. You can use it as you wish. Just drop it off at the Forestry Association branch in Madura. Thank you. Weisher picked up the car key and thanked him sincerely. This is your reward, Ollie said. No, I mean your honesty, Weisher said seriously. You can lie or not answer. Just consider yourself lucky. Ollie waved his hand impatiently and motioned him to leave quickly. Tirar shrugged and nodded to Weisher to say goodbye. He pointed to the depressed Ollie next to him. He had to stay here to comfort his old friend. Before Weisher left, he opened his mouth and wanted to say something. But after thinking about it, he closed his mouth obediently. What right and experience did he have to shamelessly tell others how to face life? After nodding and thanking him, he pushed the door and left. When he got in the car, he received a message from Tirar. It was a phone number. If you go to Madura, you can visit this guy. He is a Latin teacher in a middle school. He always thinks about something. We call him a philosopher in private. Maybe he will enlighten you. I will. After Weisher finished replying, he looked up at the huge off-road vehicle in front of him and raised his eyebrows. He rubbed his hands in anticipation. There is a free car to drive. That's great. Completely ignoring the premise that he did not have a driver's license and driving experience, Weischer stepped on the accelerator and left. He was on his way. Chapter 442. 3 days later, Weischer realized that he had made a huge mistake. He didn't expect that the off-road vehicle would consume so much fuel. Once he started the car, the US dollars in his pocket began to flow out like water. He couldn't even stop it. Just driving from Jakarta to the area near Madura had already cost him more than $1,000 US. On the one hand, the road conditions were terrible. On the other hand, Weischer had driven in the wrong direction several times. The road conditions and navigation in this place were a mess. Even though Weischer had the Astronomical Association's satellite navigation page, he almost couldn't handle it. In the end, he could only use the off-road vehicle's performance to drive through the wilderness. Then the car repair cost another $600 US. Weischer was miserable. Fortunately, he also practiced his driving skills in the Book of Destiny at night. He specifically found 2 racers with racing experience and drove wildly. As a result, he managed to improve his skills to an average level and didn't become a road killer. In the end, he realized that he was too pretentious. Not only did he not need money, he even had to pay for the fuel. If he had known earlier, he would have chosen the bicycle in the office. At least that didn't consume fuel. After passing through 2 villages and asking about the direction to Madura, Weischer stopped the car outside the village. After closing the door, he walked into the forest ahead. It was time to work. Casually, he picked up a thick branch from a big tree and peeled off the leaves that were in the way. After straightening it, it became a good exploration stick. The planting of trees and grass in the past 2 days had at least some effect. Now, Weischer had a better understanding of the various types of vitality networks formed by the existing plants. It was like visiting various communities to conduct a census and understand the community composition. It was an eye-opener. Each different type had its own unique advantages and disadvantages. For example, the vitality network formed by the plantation forest was simple in structure, but it had strong stability and was not easily destroyed by external interference. The structure of the naturally formed forest was more complex. Although it was not stable, it could form a stable state not inferior to artificial through the combination of various species. Other than that, there were pine forests, coniferous forests, mixed forests, and so on. There were even all kinds of grasslands, nurseries, and countless types of shrubs in the wilderness. There were also more complicated hybrids, as well as a variety of matryoshka dolls. Among them, some had bright points that Weischer had never thought of, while some had major natural defects that made it difficult for them to withstand natural disasters, frost, foreign species, or even human logging. During this process, Weischer didn't use the mountain ghost's ability to catalyze or extract vitality to strengthen himself. Instead, he constantly adjusted the balance of life force in his body according to the cases in the real world, further optimizing and leveling the microecological structure in his body. He felt that his body was like a huge ecological garden, and the more species there were, the better. The premise was, could he establish a stable cycle that could accommodate more species? In just 2 days, the mountain ghost's sacred mark had shrunk by half. The network of vitality that radiated from his chest to his whole body had returned to his chest. Thousands of strands extended and converged on his back. The precision and complexity of the network had increased by 3 times. He readjusted his priorities and optimized them, striving to achieve a better balance between the 3 aspects of circularity, inclusiveness, and stability. It was like playing a management game. While Weischer was readjusting himself, he was also tirelessly exploring the adaptability of his various organs to different types of plant life force. He gave his heart a stronger self-healing ability, gave his lungs and respiratory system a better toughness, tried to make his bones harder, and further improved the flexibility of his tendons. He connected part of his nervous system to the sacred mark, improved the transmission efficiency of electrical signals, and further reduced his reaction time. Even if the results weren't much, it still opened a new door for him, and he found more possibilities. Throughout this entire process, Crow remained silent as a bystander. He didn't comment, quietly appreciating him, wasting time on this kind of thing, constantly being frustrated, testing, giving up, and trying new things again. He even almost caused himself to suffer from osteochondrosis and muscle dissolution. He didn't stop it, nor did he encourage it. He just watched silently, hiding the slight astonishment and emotion in his heart. Should it be said that he was overestimating himself, or was he ambitious? The fool had already begun to explore the etherization of his organs. This was within the scope of the third level. The first level, Mercury, used the mercury, salt, and sulfur in alchemy to transform the body of a sublimator into fertile soil, forming a vessel that could bear the sacred mark. The second level, gold, gradually transformed the origin substance, and the body and soul of a sublimator would gradually transform into the miracles and disasters of the abyss, preparing for the next level of refinement. The third level, ether, would truly usher in earth-shaking changes after reaching this level. A person's organs would gradually change in a process called etherization, transforming into a completely new form and even giving them all kinds of new functions, allowing the sublimator to be reborn, completely parting with the inherent limitations of the human body and truly surpassing the human race. Huaishi's current actions could be said to be overestimating himself. But what was the problem with that? He could just treat it as a preview of the new semester's classes. Crow was delighted that after leaving his instructions, Huaishi was able to spontaneously optimize the structure of the mountain ghost and begin the next level of exploration. This talent could not be said to be not precious, and this initiative on Huaishi, who was originally muddling along like a salted fish, it was as rare as getting 8 SSRs in a row. This was an excellent sign. He was no longer passively facing this world, and he had already begun to actively welcome and find changes. This trip was really worth it. She was secretly delighted. After a short period of observation, Huaishi had already circled the periphery of the dense forest, and the probing stick in his hand, which was cut from a tree branch, constantly poked down. He probed the nodes and the center of gravity of the vitality network here. He did not need to use the mountain ghost's sacred mark to sense. After 2 days of testing, Huaishi had already formed a faint blind sense based on his experience. It was like minesweeping. He skillfully marked out the key points. Then he reached out, grabbed a few grass seeds from his pocket, and casually threw them into the dozens of small holes poked by the probing stick. He stepped on them and was done with it. He had sent a new neighbor to the community and ensured that everyone could get along harmoniously. He had also lent a helping hand at the crucial stage of Baihi's germination. He could imagine how Baihi of Germination's germination had set off a faint ripple in the dense forest network here, and then left a secret mark there for the successors to carry out the next step. Anyway, regardless of whether he found any traces of dragon mistletoe along the way, Huaishi would casually plant a few pieces and treat it as pure practice. Furthermore, he had seen many ascenders like him, shuttling through various parts of Indonesia. Just like in the early stages of real-time strategy games, those farmers who were used to explore the map. He did not quite believe that the Indonesia Forestry Association was doing this purely to control the dragon mistletoe. Most likely, it was incidental, right? There must be a more important reason mixed in. But what did this have to do with Huaishi, an outsider? If he continued to investigate this matter, there would definitely be trouble waiting for him, and it would also be a waste of time. He was too lazy to think about it carefully. If he had the time to go to Rome, he might as well go eat a few more bowls of rice. It was time to eat. Huaisha rubbed his empty stomach, thinking about where to find something to eat next. He was not used to the local food, so he could only rely on the fried chicken and cola from fast food restaurants to survive. To be honest, he was a little sick of it. Should I find a set of tools and start a meal? Huaisha thought to himself as he opened the door and got in the car. He was stunned for a moment. After a moment of silence, he turned on the key and started the car. Soon, the off-road vehicle was back on the road. It sped forward, running over the puddles and mud on the road as it sped toward Madura. While driving, Huaisha raised his hand and yawned. Then, he casually pushed his hand to the side. A muffled sound exploded in the enclosed car. Drummer! The low sound of the wind spread out, followed by the crisp sound of a skull hitting the car window. In the front passenger seat, a little ghost appeared out of thin air. There was still a stunned expression on its face as it slammed into the car window. Its eyes rolled back, and it fainted. As early as the moment Huaisha got in the car, he smelled another smell in the car that did not belong here. Someone was hiding in the car. It was just that he could not see it, even if he could not feel the premonition of death. Huaisha's nerves were still tense. After a short disguise, he seized the opportunity when the other party's breathing gradually stabilized and made a move. Then, he directly knocked out the little ghost who was hiding in the front passenger seat. Fortunately, the moment Huaisha made contact, he sensed something was wrong in advance based on the feeling of the hand and the estimation of its weight. Thus, he withdrew most of his strength. Otherwise, this move would have been enough to send the little ghost to the ICU. Whether or not there was an ICU in this damn place was another matter. Stepping on the brakes, Huaisha came to a stop and looked back at the little boy in the front passenger seat. He was about 12 or 13 years old. His hair was slightly curly. God knew how long it had been since he cut it. It looked messy, but his clothes and body were quite clean. It was obvious that he often bathed. Huaisha reached out and skillfully searched the pockets and places where weapons might be hidden. No weapons, no stigmata, and he did not feel any malice toward him. Huaisha twisted his neck and revealed a cold smile amidst the cracking sounds. He sneaked into his car secretly and did not even have a single cent on him. Did he really think that it was a free ride on the Stellaris? Chapter 443. When the kid opened his eyes, he saw a face hanging upside down from the top of his head, looking straight at him, leaning against a tree and smoking a cigarette. Then he realized that the one hanging upside down was not the other party, but himself. He was hanging upside down from a tree, with no one to rely on. Subconsciously, he struggled for a moment, but to no avail. Subconsciously, he disappeared again. Then he saw the rope wriggling, trying to climb up and escape. Click! There was a soft sound. He turned his head stiffly and saw the smiling big brother and the gun in his hand. The black muzzle was pointed at him. Name? Huaisha asked kindly. Without waiting for an answer, he pulled the trigger. The loud sound proved the power of the shot. Well, he picked it up in the toolbox in the car. It seemed that Ollie was really from the privileged class. After sucking in a breath of cold air, the kid finally learned to be obedient. Name? Huaisha spoke again, using Latin, Dongsha language, and choppy Javanese to ask. Age? Occupation? What do you do? Sai, Sayer. The child swallowed his saliva, and his silhouette appeared in the air. He raised his hands in surrender and replied in Javanese, Siya Ramadan, I'm 10 years old. Uncle, please spare my life. I just saw you asking about Madura's location and wanted to secretly take your car there. Huaisha frowned unhappily. It was not because the kid wanted to secretly take his car, but because he made him sound old. You have to call me handsome big brother, understand? Huaisher put the muzzle closer. The kid nodded like he was pounding garlic. His face was red because he was hanging upside down. So, Huaisher pulled the trigger. He broke the rope. The kid fell from the air. Huaisher grabbed him by the collar and threw him next to the tree stump. Huaisher didn't untie the rope on his feet. He found a clean rock and sat down. He looked at the panicked kid and asked, "Invisibility, what's going on?" The child's eyes wandered. Just as he was about to say something, he saw Huaisher's gentle smile. "You know, your big brother, really like to bully little kids to death, especially those who don't pay for the ride." Sayar swallowed his saliva dryly. "I don't know either. Suddenly, one day, I learned it. Others couldn't see me, as if I didn't exist." Huaisher nodded, understanding the situation. A wild, sublimated brat, 10 years old. Wasn't it too small? "Where are your parents?" They are waiting for me in Madura. They are all very famous experts. They are all very powerful, and they have 19 subordinates. Each of them has a gun. A lot of guns. They are all very powerful." Huaisher sat on a rock with his legs crossed, watching him rack his brains to come up with a lie. Blow, continue to blow. Under his scrutiny, the child's expression gradually became awkward, and he couldn't continue speaking. "All right, don't be afraid." Huaisher pushed the pistol out of the magazine, one by one in front of the child, and threw them on the ground. Then he put the pistol back into his pocket. He leaned forward and looked at the child's face. "I won't kill you, and I won't hurt you. As the price for secretly riding on my ride, you have to answer my questions honestly. Then I can send you back to your parents." Sayar was silent and turned his head away awkwardly. After a long time, he said, "They don't want me anymore. I ran out alone. My mother married someone else, and my father has a new son. Even if you send me back, I will run out again." "Where is your home?" "I don't know. I ran out for a long time, more than half a year. I have long forgotten where I went. I don't even know where this is." Huaisher was silent for a long time. He scratched his head and said, "For so long, you lived by being invisible." Sayar nodded. "Very good, Sayar. Your honesty has earned you fair treatment." Huaisher took a deep breath. Then he looked into Sayar's eyes with a serious expression. His eyes turned cold, and he said, "Tell me, for so long, did you use your ability to hurt others?" I did not." Sayar's face turned pale as he was stared at by the pair of emotionless eyes. He shook his head frantically and said, I just secretly took something that I needed. There was nothing I could do. I have no money. I swear, I only took a little." "How does it feel to kill someone?" Huaisher asked indifferently. "I did not kill anyone." Sayar screamed out in panic. "I did not." "Then what about the damage?" Huaisher asked. "Don't you think this ability is very convenient? Even if you are holding a knife, no one will be able to notice it. Even if you kill someone, no one will know that you are wrong. You can even do whatever you want to those beautiful little girls. Isn't that right?" The mountain ghost's malice suppressed his consciousness, digging out the truth and lies inch by inch. "I did not. I really did not." Sayar struggled with all his might. He was so scared that tears flowed out of his eyes. He sobbed and shouted, "I swear, sir, I swear I only took a little something, a little bit of money. I just hope that no one will see me. That was all I wanted. As long as you don't hit me, I never wanted to hurt anyone." Huaisher was silent. Then he suddenly reached out with his hand. He pulled up Sayar's sleeves, pulled open his collar, and pulled down his shirt and trousers. Then he checked every inch of Sayar's skin. There were burn marks from cigarette butts, scars from blisters, blade marks, and abnormalities in the bones of his right hand. It had been broken before but was not properly reconnected. He finally understood why Sayar wanted to run away. How could he obtain such a soul? After a long time, he silently put on Sayar's clothes. Then he raised his hand and untied the rope. Sayar continued to cry. He looked at Chen Xiaolian with fear and shrank back. "All right, don't cry." Huaishir sighed and raised his hand to ruffle Sayar's hair. "Let's go. I'll take you to eat. Then I'll find you a place where you can be raised." I don't want to go to an orphanage." Sayar's face turned pale, with fright. He shook his head with all his might. I've been there before. It's like hell. Sir, I beg you. I won't send you to an orphanage." Huaishir shook his head. How could he not know what an orphanage was like? Not to mention, it was in a chaotic place like Indonesia. The Astronomy Association had a special organization for raising ascendants. Everything was to ensure that ascendants could properly return to society and not cause any trouble due to their own abilities. Raising a child didn't cost much. With less surveillance cameras and cameras, they would have all the money they needed. When they reached Madura, he would contact the Astronomy Association and pick up Sayar. Before that, he had to ensure that Sayar hadn't completely fallen. Even if he passed Huaishir's test, he wouldn't be able to pass the Astronomy Association's review. Those bastards who originally worked in the building didn't know the meaning of mercy. They would definitely directly read his mind and search his memory. Fortunately, Sayar didn't completely lose his bottom line because of his wandering. Otherwise, even if Huaishir didn't kill him, he would immediately turn around and send him to the border prison in Jakarta. "Let's go. We'll go eat first." Huaishir smiled at him. He didn't feel ashamed to use the soul link to make his little brother feel that what he said made sense. Benefiting from his own appearance and influence, the frightened Sayar gradually calmed down. He had some trust in this gentle big brother. But soon, when they walked out of the forest, they saw the off-road vehicle driving away on the road. It was originally parked by the side of the road. My car?" Huaishir raised his hand and slapped the back of his head. He couldn't believe it. It was stolen. How long had it been? In the time it took to go to the toilet, it was stolen, along with Huaishir's backpack, wallet, and a lot of equipment. It was stolen. Sayar obviously accepted the reality faster than Huaishir. He looked at Huaishir with sympathy. "Don't be sad. It happens all the time." Unexpectedly, Huaishir didn't fly into a rage. He didn't even chase after them. Instead, he stood there calmly with a slightly bitter expression. He didn't look angry that his car was stolen. Instead, he seemed to be thinking about where to find food next. "You're not worried?" Sayar couldn't believe it. "Why should I be worried?" Huaishir asked back. This was the modern realm. This was the central area of the modern realm. So, what if it was a little messy? If it was in Dongsha, he might argue with the Social Security Bureau. But in Indonesia, you dare to steal from the Astronomy Association? Are you tired of living? Moreover, do you think it's so easy to take my things? Huaishir didn't know how much sweat and how many viruses were left on it. Once Huaishir released the control, it would immediately become a moving source of pollution. He was looking for death. "Don't worry. Let's go find some food nearby first." Huaishir shook his head calmly. He reached out and held Sayar's hand. "Let's go. What do you want to eat? It's my treat. I still have $200. It's enough for a good meal." Fortunately, they were already in the vicinity of Madura. It was a city after all. It wasn't difficult to find some food. Half an hour later, Huaishir and Sayar were sitting in the Colonel's Chicken Nuggets chain store. They were enjoying the air conditioning, eating the chicken bun, and drinking happy drinks. Since they were already here, Huaisher planned to find the philosopher mentioned by Tylal first. After that, he would call the Jakarta branch and ask them to check where the car went. However, when Huaisher called the philosopher, no one answered. He called a few times, but they were all busy. He put down the phone in confusion and glanced at Silal, who was wolfing down the food. He couldn't help but raise his hand and hit the back of his head. Eat slowly. I'll give it all to you, okay? You'll definitely have diarrhea if you eat like this. Sayar answered vaguely, his face glistening with the oil of fried chicken. He raised his head to look at Huaisher, then lowered his head and continued to eat. Huaisher couldn't help but roll his eyes. Okay, I'll have to spend money to buy you stomach medicine later. Just when he was feeling helpless, the phone rang again. I'm sorry. I was in class just now and didn't pick up the phone. A low voice came from the other end of the phone. The Latin tone was exquisite and standard. Is this Mr. Huaisher from the Astronomy Society? Yes, that's right. Huaisher nodded. You know me? Tylal mentioned you when he called me yesterday. He also told me about your doubts. I'm happy to share some of my shallow opinions with you. Let me see. My next class is about 90 minutes later. Maybe we can talk before that. The philosopher said, if it's convenient, can you come to the city? I'm a bit busy at school. I can't leave. Of course, no problem. Huaisher nodded happily. I'll be there soon. After a polite goodbye, the phone hung up. Huaisher had begun to look forward to the philosopher's answer. Chapter 444. 20 minutes later, in a school in the city of Madura, Huaisher finally met the philosopher. Obviously, this was a private, aristocratic high school. Whether it was in terms of security or facilities, it was different from the schools Huaisher had seen along the way. It was cleaner, safer, and more expensive. Just like a noble manor, between the exquisite buildings and courtyards, young boys and girls walked together in twos and threes, excitedly or calmly discussing something with each other. In the distance, there were children running excitedly on the grassland, chasing each other. The beautiful atmosphere of youth rushed to their faces. Walking among them, Huaisher and Sayar, who stood behind him, were like two outliers that didn't fit in. Looking around in shock, Sayar compared himself to those big brothers and big sisters, as if he was ashamed of himself. He shrunk behind Huaisher and lowered his head. Huaisher walked calmly on the campus, calmly looking around at everything, staring at the curious faces of the young people, even if they seemed to be about the same age as him. It's so nice. He sighed softly, staring at the continuous green and white buildings, listening to the sound of the piano in the piano room. It was a little stuttering, but it was stubbornly working hard, intermittently moving forward, until Sayar couldn't stand the stares of the people around him, pulled his sleeve, and pointed forward. Huaisher saw a middle-aged man carrying a paper bag. The slightly old and thin man with glasses was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt and trousers. His knuckles were rough, and there were calluses left from years of writing. He was holding a bulging paper bag. It was very eye-catching, not because of his appearance, but because of his lineage. Sparse black hair was meticulously combed behind his head, dark eyes, fair skin, and a rosary that represented the Holy Spirit wrapped around his wrist. Huaisher didn't expect the philosopher to be a Roman. He stood next to the bench and waved at Huaisher. There were a few thick textbooks on the bench next to him. They had been flipping through them for too long, so the covers were a little damaged. However, the edges were not rolled up. It was obvious that they were taken good care of. I'm sorry, but I can only entertain you here, Mr. Huaisher. After Huaisher and the rest sat down, the philosopher spoke first. He looked at the two people in front of him and sighed softly. I have to say, the two of you are younger than I thought, especially this one. Mr. Sale. Sale was stunned. The philosopher smiled kindly at Why Sure and did not say anything else. Instead, he looked at the puzzled Why Sure and said, I already know why you're here, but do you mind if I finish this before we talk? There was a half-eaten sandwich in the paper bag in his hand. It seemed to have been made by himself. It contained a large amount of chili sauce, mustard, and raw beef that even Why-Sure was a little afraid of. After getting Why-Sure's permission, he took out the sandwich and continued to eat. When he ate, he was very regular. He was not in a hurry or in a hurry. On the contrary, he was calm and full of rhythm. Every mouthful was fully chewed before swallowing. Every few mouthfuls, he would pick up the thermos cup next to him and take a sip of tea. 5 minutes later, he took out a handkerchief to wipe his mouth, screwed the lid of the thermos, and looked up at Why Sure. Sorry to keep you waiting. Actually, I don't mind waiting longer. Why Sure shrugged. I like this kind of patience, full of tolerance and awe for knowledge and understanding. Mr. Why Sure, this kind of quality is rare. The philosopher seemed to be happy, but also seemed to be regretful. There's one thing I need to say in advance. My sole ability is to make others feel that what I say is very reasonable. Even if it's some fallacies, they will sound convincing. After pondering for a moment, he abruptly explained, Unfortunately, this effect is passive. I can't turn it off myself. However, this kind of thing can be understood as long as you think about it. He thought for a moment and gave an example. For example, today's sun is black. What a load of nonsense. Why Sure frowned. Today's sun was indeed black. Wait a minute. He was stunned for a moment and subconsciously raised his head, staring straight at the dazzling sun above his head. After a few seconds, he finally reacted and could not help but gasp. His back was a little cold. This kind of soul ability was a little too scary. If the philosopher did not explain in advance, even the ascendants would not be able to guard against it. I've embarrassed myself in front of you. The philosopher sighed with a headache. This kind of ability is very useful in education. Of course, the premise is that the theory I tell the students is correct. But there are too many things in this world that can't be confirmed. Thanks to this troublesome soul ability, I originally majored in advanced mathematics and theoretical physics. But now, in order not to mislead the students, I can only teach grammar in high school. After all, for this kind of thing, even if it's a slip of the tongue, at most, I'll lose 2 marks on the exam. After a pause, he looked at Why Sure seriously. The reason why I said this is, on the one hand, out of honesty, and on the other hand, to avoid misunderstandings. I don't think what I say is absolutely correct, so I hope you can always be suspicious of what I say. In her silent contemplation, Why Sure vaguely came to a realization. In any case, the philosopher did not have any malicious intentions toward him. It was better to say that he was frank from the beginning. Later, when Why Sure was thinking, he could avoid the influence of the philosopher's soul ability to the greatest extent. Ah, you're starting to think. The philosopher showed a gratified smile. Very good. Thinking is the first step to survival, Mr. Why Sure. You're already in the zone. I believe we'll have a good chat later. Do you need me to ask you a question? Why Sure asked. No, I already know why you're here, and I've already prepared the answer. After a moment of silence, the philosopher suddenly said, But before that, can I ask a few questions? Sorry, this is purely out of professional habit. I always get into the zone of a teacher. Why Sure shrugged indifferently. Didn't I come here to ask you to answer my doubts? Then just treat it as an impromptu lesson. The philosopher happily slapped his knees twice, straightened his expression, and suddenly asked, Do you think that there's a fundamental difference between an ascender and an ordinary person? Are you talking about the soul, the stigmata, or the ability? No, it's even more different. than these superficial things. It's even more fundamental. The philosopher shook his head. I'm not talking about the amount of origin substance or the outstanding ability. I'm also not talking about the heroic performance of heroes or the disgusting behavior of criminals. It's not a difference in personality, but something closer to the driving force. If I put it this way, it might be too obscure. Let's give an example. His fingers subconsciously tapped on the fountain pen. After a moment of thought, he suddenly asked, "Do you know about the philosophical zombie?" "If it's a zombie, I've come into contact with it and have some understanding." Huaisher replied. In fact, he had cut down quite a few, whether it was ghouls, lichens, or other things. These kinds of things were always emerging in various places, serving as cheap cannon fodder. No, this is actually a very interesting hypothesis. The philosopher shook his head. It's not that there's an eternally hungry and bloody corpse crying piteously for food 24 hours a day, waiting to take a bite out of you, and then infect you with a fatal virus. Instead, let's say that there's a strange thing mixed in with the crowd. Moreover, its appearance, behavior, and physiological structure are all like an ordinary person. He said, if you poke it with a knife, it will cry out in pain. When the air conditioner is turned up too high, it will tell you that it's cold. It will work, talk, sing, take photos, and post them on its blog. When it sees beautiful girls, its heart will beat faster. When it's hungry, it will go out to eat like us. It might also cook at home, but it doesn't matter. In short, this thing looks exactly like a human being. He paused for a moment and said calmly, except that it has no self-awareness. Huaisher frowned subconsciously, feeling that something was wrong. Or to be more precise, it never has anything of its own in its mind. At this point, he raised his head and stared at Huaisher with a disconcerting, sharp gaze. It just doesn't think. It just doesn't think. It lives like a zombie, dead living, living dead, puppet, machine, whatever you want to call it. But how do you verify whether it has self-awareness? Huaisher didn't know how to answer. Even if he thought about it, he couldn't come to a conclusion. This was just a ridiculous hypothesis. Just as some extreme psychologists would think that the existence of self-will was just a lie made up by the brain, this theory was quite popular until the appearance of the soul. You should know, Mr. Philosopher, Huaisher said, everything that can't be proven false is not within the scope of rational discussion. In other words, this hypothesis was destined to be fruitless from the beginning. I know. The philosopher nodded. I'm just curious about it. How many people will think about it? Mr. Huaisher, have you thought about it? How many people will choose to become a living corpse? When he looked back, his eyes were terrifyingly calm, and he asked softly, if I told you that there might be such living corpses in this world, and there might even be a large number of them, how would you feel? Huaisher froze in place. Being looked at like that, he shuddered. You should have seen such a person, right? The philosopher leaned on the bench and said indifferently, when he hears those meaningful words, he will feel that they are wise words. When he reads 2 short stories made up in the biographies of famous people, he will also seem to understand the truth of the world. When he finds something being snatched, he will also feel that it is a good thing. When he sees 1 or 2 vigorous articles, he will find the direction of his life. He will say what others say, what others think is right. He will also feel that it is the truth. If someone commits a crime, he will be filled with righteous indignation in the crowd. Perhaps he will also appeal, feel injustice, and always stand on the side of the majority, hide in the crowd, and be ordinary. They have reason, but they don't think. They can feel love, but they don't spread it. They learn the truth, but they don't use it. They know where wisdom lies, but they are proud of their ignorance. They thirst for justice, but they stubbornly want to push things different from themselves to the evil side. I used to be terrified of this, Mr. Huaisher. The philosopher calmly said, I was full of doubts about this. Why can't they think? Why don't they open their eyes and expose those childish lies? Do they really understand what they are doing? Have they really figured out their roles? Are they really alive? After a short pause, he finally asked the last question. Is such a person really qualified to have a soul? You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.